Right, so our next session this afternoon is going to be VTOL, the state of the industry now and where it's going in the future. This is a fascinating session of insight into the eVTOL business. It's going to be led and moderated by Rex Alexander, who you've all probably met already and heard him speaking earlier this morning, I think yesterday. So he's going to manage the session. He's going to introduce the team of panel. It is going to be an open discussion. We do want to involve you. It's not going to be a 2D presentation telling you the state of the industry. It's more of a discussion. So it's really important that you do get involved. I'll run around with a microphone if you want, Rex, so we can ask people in the audience. I think we take our lead from Colin earlier, who managed to stimulate everybody into chatting. So if we've got anybody outside, please do come in, take your seats. This is the future of our industry. It's a really important part and a very, very important part of what VAST stands for in terms of collaboration and how we come together as an industry, vertical lift industry. I think it's really, really, really important and really exciting future of our industry. So I'm very keen and eager to hear what's going to be discussed today in this fireside chat. With that said, I'm going to hand over to Rex. Rex, if you can take the team and have a conversation.
So my name's Rex Alexander. I work and run a company called 5Alpha. We develop and design infrastructure for heliports and vertiports and have for about 25 years. I'm also the infrastructure advisor to the Vertical Flight Society and also work with Helicopter Association International in that space. And I'm the co-chair of the infrastructure working group for the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team since before it was the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team. So on the technical side, may I ask, do we have Mr. Darshan online? Darshan?
Hey, good afternoon. I hope y'all can hear me.
Yes, I got you. I might bring up his volume just a little bit. So to make sure that I don't miss anything and make sure I get this completely correct, I'm going to have each individual introduce themselves and tell you their titles and who they work for. So Darshan, I'll let you go first if that's okay.
Absolutely. So good afternoon, everyone. I am Darshan Divakaran. I go by Dash. I'm the Senior Manager for Strategic Innovation and Partnerships for AFWERX, which is the innovation arm for the Air Force. And under the AFWERX program, we have Agility Prime, which is the eVTOL program for the Air Force. And within the program, I am the airspace integration lead and work on industry partnerships. So, work a lot with the eVTOL companies, infrastructure companies, airspace focus areas and everything. And really happy to be here. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there in person, but nevertheless, the panel is going to be amazing being hybrid. So happy to follow up with questions and stuff later on, but I'll pass it on to Rex.
Thank you, Darshan. So starting my right, I'll go ahead and let Ife introduce himself.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Ife Ogunleye. I am with Joby Aviation. There I'm over the certification and system safety efforts that we're undertaking.
Cool. Hi, Colin. Sorry you got me up here again.
And I'm Pedro Carlel. I'm Director of Safety and Systems Engineering for Archer Aviation.
So in looking at what this is, I know that several of you probably have seen this in the newspaper and on the news and different places. So eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and landing, distributed electrical lift vehicles, advanced air mobility or AAM, also urban air mobility, UAM. Not some new concepts in some respect. We've been doing urban air mobility with helicopters for a very long time, but with this, it's the distributed electrical lift that we're looking at. So today it's great to have this group on the stage and also with us online, looking at specifically what this conference is about, safety, and looking at what this particular industry is considering and adopting and directions we're taking. So we thought instead of giving you a bunch of PowerPoint slides that after lunch you would all be sound asleep, we would do a little bit of a fireside chat and have a good open discussion. So we're going to go through some different things that we've talked about over the last couple of months, and then open it up at the end for some Q&A from the audience. So and look at this, each individual is open to comment on any question. It's not for any one particular person, and then we'll go from there. So in the first issue or discussion topic. What do you see the public's expectation for eVTOL and advanced air mobility travel will be, and what level of safety compliance will they demand? Who's first?
I guess I'll go first. My view is the public wants to walk into these things and walk out of them without thinking about it twice, right? They want it to be a no-brainer, just like getting on a transport airline is today. And just integrate it into their lives without having to worry if what they're doing is a risk or not. That is the general attitude towards everything these days. And as a new industry, we really can't afford to trip and make a mistake where more established industries have more forbearance because of their history of safety.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right there, Pedro. I think to get to that level of confidence where just like if you take your family on holiday or anyone taking their family on holiday or going on a business trip doesn't think about safety when they step onto their Boeing or Airbus product unless there's been an issue. And that's when it comes into the public, the media focused public perception. When you talk about individual perception, that's all, people don't really think about it. But when you start talking about the societal perception, that's when you start to get the influences coming in, the influences. And I think a good example is when you look at what's happening, unfortunately, for the guys who are doing autonomous cars. And when they've had their accidents, and that's the number of reasons why they've had them, etc. But you look at the media coverage of it, it's shaping the public perception. And that, I think, is another part of the challenge. It's not just the individual perceptions, but it's how do we help and support the people, the industry understand. And I know Nancy mentioned it yesterday, the public perception, they don't even know what they are yet. But what we need to do is make sure as we start to roll out and as we start to make them part of normal transportation, we've got to be able to provide that confidence, that safety confidence as we roll it out. As they start to learn about it, they've got to learn that it is just as safe as, the design 1 times 10 to the -9 is just as safe as. We've got to keep pushing that.
Yeah, I think the public definitely has a very healthy expectation for aviation travel, and by all means, that's going to be extended to UAM operations. It's interesting with hearing about the leading causes of fatal accidents that's been discussed this week. What is evident is that these new vehicles naturally incorporate a lot of the safety enhancing features that are being suggested to improve current vertical operations. And so, yes, absolutely, where these introductions of these vehicles need to maintain the level of safety currently experienced today. But I believe we have an opportunity to improve that also, because when you integrate these technologies just foundationally to the aircraft as opposed to doing modifications to try to introduce these certain technologies, I believe you have a more holistic solution and possibly a more integrated, more natural human-machine interface. So I think there is a strong opportunity to even improve on the level of safety that we have today. And that should be the goal that we should be striving for.
Darshan, any thoughts?
So, if I put both my commercial, pilot hat and as well the, you can say the unmanned systems hat and eVTOL hat. My thought here is, when you talk about public, there's two areas. One is the public that is part of the industry, and then the public who are not part of the industry, but are going to use the technology. And when it comes to us within the industry, we are becoming smarter because we have examples from over 100 years of manned aviation lessons learned. And then we also have, in the last few years, unmanned systems with the small drones, mid-sized drones and everything. We have more knowledge coming on parts that are, commercially off-the-shelf type of parts being used for technologies and stuff. So we have become smarter in a way, but there's a lot of things that we still are unclear because the vehicle size is different, the vehicle use cases are different. So as an industry, within the industry, the public acceptance is way different from those who are going to later use this technology. For them, they need to hold someone responsible when it comes to safety. So it's like organizations like FAA and also they look upon NASA and DoD to be the responsible agencies here to help push this technology forward. but also ensure safety in every aspect of it. So from a general public, there's a lot that they are unclear about. Some of them are still unclear what these vehicles are. And so, end of the day, aviation even today is held on to complete, you would expect 100% safety for everything. And that's why today, even in a bad weather, like just last week, I flew through the tropical storm here and I was heading back to San Diego. I was confident that I could take the flight because I trust the pilots, I trust the manned aircrafts. And that level of trust is what we need to develop with these technologies, that someone can sit in and feel safe. So a lot of responsibility on our side to make sure that we are communicating safety rather than the luxury part of these aircrafts.
No, and I think you said perception, and as possession is 9/10 of the law, perception is 9/10 of reality. And in this space, we've already said that there's a lot of people that don't understand or know what this is. So it is our goal and our ownership of the problem to do the education, fill that void that is perception so that reality takes hold, because that's one of the biggest challenges is the education piece for the public community. So next question, and looking at the advanced air mobility industry as a public transportation model, what do you see as some of the biggest safety hurdles we as an industry face?
First, I get to go first again. Honestly, the same ones the helicopter industry faces. Frankly, and I think my colleagues will back me up on this, we can make the vehicle safer because of the nature of the technology in many ways. But we've all seen over the last days that the vehicle is not really the leading cause of accidents, and the operating environment, the people operating the vehicle are going to be subject to the same challenges as helicopter pilots are today. So Mr. Jennings was even commenting about his concerns about our industry bringing more issues and then contaminating, if you will, the perception over helicopters. That's a fair point to make. I prefer to look at it from the positive direction, which is there is a huge challenge in building competent people to operate helicopters, and our industry may offer a pathway to grow, new pilots, new maintainers on platforms that may be more forgiving in some regards because of, their design. And yet we have to deal with the same loss of control, object impact, loss of visibility issues that you do. So it was really interesting to hear the discussion over the last 2 days, because I think those really will be as good a job as we may do on the vehicles themselves. Those will be the things that we lose sleep over.
Absolutely. The operation is going to be a big piece. And when people talk about safety, especially at OEM, it's easy to automatically go to things like 10 to the -9, design assurance levels, and things like that to try to impact safety. But like, Pedro said, a majority of it will be determined by how these vehicles are operated and the whole infrastructure around that. And that's also why we're endeavoring to be both the operator and the OEM to try to transfer that knowledge that's developed during the initial design of the vehicle to ensure it's a proper, safe operation, because we do definitely see the operations as being a significant contributor to that. And then also, when you look at the type of operation and the different FAR parts, whether it's 91, 135, or 121, you do see if you compare the two, you see a different varying rigor and expectations across those different parts. And then marrying that up with the public's perception, the public doesn't know the difference between a 91 and 135 and 121. I remember my parents were going on a helicopter tour in Hawaii, and I was like, is that a 91 or 135 operation? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, okay, we should find that out, but it's just the public doesn't understand that these vehicles may be a 135 operation versus a 121. And what does that mean for the public perception? What does that mean for the expectations on the operators and the manufacturers?
I think the other bit that comes out is, if we look at risk and how we're going to be safe in various different isolated areas, we can manage those isolated areas. But to me, that's not the problem. It's the gaps in between. It's when there's something that happens in one area that has a knock-on consequence somewhere else. So that might be where there's a vertiport issue that has a knock-on consequence to the operator. It might be an airspace thing. It might be a confliction with another operator, which might be a helicopter, might be fixed wing, might be another eVTOL. It's how do we manage those interfaces? How do we make sure that the communication is there to allow us to learn and share from each other so that we don't have these gaps in between where things fall apart?
Dash, any thoughts?
Just to add to everything what the panelists said makes total sense. And the only part I would add is the aspect of supply chain, which is critical here, because when we talk about even maintenance overall, that's going to be a safety challenge, because we have to make sure that good parts are installed and added to these aircrafts. And when maintenance is required, if we don't have the parts readily available in that type of situations, do we use poor quality materials and stuff? That is what we have to be careful about. So good supply chain and resiliency is important when it comes to safety, and that's something which we are already, we have already learned as a lesson, and I think that is something we have to overcome on the overall safety side.
Thank you, Dash. And we touched on a little bit, just to follow up on that, that question is, what do we do as an industry to collaborate, make sure that we're collaborating properly to address these safety challenges?
Yeah, I think an important aspect is probably just the industry groups and forums such as this. Being able to collectively come together as different stakeholders and develop pathways and innovative solutions to these. And then also for folks that either OEMs or operators that are dealing directly with the regulatory side or either public services, collaborating often and early, and bringing some of those solutions forward. Some industry groups tend to take quite a bit of time and unlikely going to support some of the timeframes that we're talking about to see these things in operations. But that doesn't prevent us as a company going and proposing some of those solutions directly with the regulators and pushing those forward in that venue. So I think that's ultimately going to be a major piece of how we can collaboratively address some of the safety concerns.
Yeah, I think there's another bit which is it kind of picked up a little bit. One of the things I picked up today, talking to people over lunch, was everyone's taking away actions in their head, in the little notebooks or on their iPads, or whatever. They're making things they're going to do, that's a great bit for me. But it's how do we capture that in a bit more formal? So when you look at the helicopter safety enhancements that the U.S. helicopter safety team's been talking about, when you look at some of the vast working groups that are going to have a series of safety enhancements, that's the action bit. I think the challenge for us is to work out what are the actions that we need to be taking now collaboratively that means we're not going to have problems later on that we then have to try and solve as an operational mitigation rather than solving it now. So what are the early areas where we know that's something in particular as a result of this new sector we need to go and focus on? So I think there's that. I think the other bit is actually to be wary of making it a structure of collaboration where there's too much drag in the system. And quite a lot of, just like you were saying, that by the time you get, if the solution is going to be new regulation, unfortunately there is a level of drag there. So it's up to us to actually take the action and drive it and work it, but also from a global perspective. So if you look at the model of Heli Offshore, and Francois, I'm not bringing you up, but Heli Offshore was formed to overcome some of the challenges of collaboration that wasn't working as effectively as it could do, and created a fantastic collaboration that was global, and actually delivered a lot of safety improvements, safety enhancements at a global level. They learned from one area of the globe and they applied it across the globe. And I think that's something we could look at as well, of how do we collaborate in that kind of global environment?
Yeah, I think, well, Colin yesterday brought up the point of competition versus collaboration. We are right now in a very peculiar time of this new industry where, on the one hand, we are all competing for investors, for talent, for customers, for everything. And on the other hand, if one of us makes a bad mistake and has a serious accident, the entire industry could be fundamentally compromised in the public's view and regulator attitudes and everything else. So it's really hard to, at this stage, let's all agree to share our solutions. Nobody's going to want to do that. If you look at the 3 aircraft that our companies make, they look completely different, right? At a fundamental level. If you look at a Sikorsky, a Bell helicopter, they look fundamentally similar at a fundamental level because the big questions have been answered. What's the best way to do this? It looks something like this. In our case, that's definitely not the case yet. So that is all business critical intellectual property that nobody's going to want to share. But in conversation yesterday, it became clear that we are willing to share and should at least share the list of issues that we're worried about, right? We might not say how we're solving it. We might run into people who don't want to share that information, but there's really no reason why we shouldn't share. Have you thought about this, right? Do you have a solution for that? Even if I can't tell you what my solution is, we can at least agree that it's an issue and that we should solve it somehow. And so I think as a baseline, that's something we can definitely do, regardless of regulator involvement.
No, that's good. Dash, thoughts?
Yeah, just to summarize what everyone mentioned, I think data exchange is important. The more we are able to share data within these groups and translate it to safety challenges that we can overcome, that's important. The other part is as we move forward, it's also important to bring in the right expertise for the various groups. And it's sometimes just from a DoD perspective, we even though the Air Force is working on the eVTOL program, we are partnered with Navy, we are partnered with the Marines, we are part of the Army. We also have strong partnership with NASA, FAA. The thing is, it's very easy to start something from scratch and not be in the not be in a positive direction and just have parallel efforts going on. So it's very important from a group's perspective, industry, partnerships from industry, academia, and government all working together. And then finally, there has to be a point where working groups move from just working groups to action operations group. It's very important to start testing what we are learning. And that's something, from a DoD perspective, we are heavily focused on is the operational aspect of things. And our partnerships that we are looking into are focused on operational capability and creating a test environment where we can evaluate the challenges. So overall, partnerships is going to help elevate the stress on just one organization. So we heavily believe in that.
Now, all good thoughts, and I think we've seen collaboration significantly through the Vertical Flight Society, as well as Helicopter Association International, as well as NASA and the General Aircraft Manufacturers Association. So it's really good to see that. I think we keep fostering that and make sure that we're all at least on the same page going forward, and share what we can share. And when we identify issues, we work together to solve those. So in having these gentlemen up here today, we have three very specific companies represented that do have aircraft in certification, and in definitely what I would call the top 10% right now in the eVTOL. And then with Dash Online, the AFWERX, they've worked with many of these companies in the DoD space. So the question that we had is, what are some of the lessons as an organization that you've learned so far to date, and how are you applying those to operations and safety today and tomorrow?
I think one of the key lessons we've got is not to lose sight of the agility and the startup kind of mindset that we had. At the same time, recognizing we're building an aerospace company and actually making sure that we really put the mindset, the safety understanding, the why, back to the SMS conversation we had this morning, is understanding why we manage safety and why it's important and what kind of language, because we're putting these new companies together and we're all in the same boat. Even if it's sponsored or connected with a large legacy OEM, it's still a new company and you have to form its own way of working. Each company has a different way of doing things. And everyone that joins that company comes in with a different mindset, a different mental model, and you have to try and harmonize people, come with a common way of delivering what you're trying to deliver. And I think that's been one of the things that we've learned already, and actually working very hard from my side, from the safety side, is to try and help everyone understand and build that safety way as a way that they can get their hands around. So that's something that we've learned already based on the observations I've had in the last 18 months and so on, and right from the beginning of the company. And now we've recognized right now is the time to really turn that up, and do something slightly differently.
Think it's, yeah, you're absolutely right. That's been a fun challenge to work through. I think, right now is a very exciting time to be a safety practitioner. It's just, a lot of our functions are probably, more traditional, but we definitely have new technology on new components performing new functions never before on an aircraft, right? That's exciting to be a part of that. And, like you said, we'll have a room full of, safety engineers. One person's from Gulfstream, another one from Boeing, another one from Honeywell. And, like, okay, how are we going to solve this problem? And there's like 15 different ways to approach it. And we really found that even some of the most simple assumptions made during a safety assessment may get challenged due to the uniqueness of the architecture that we have chosen to implement on our aircraft. And so having that flexibility to have a firm understanding of what's traditionally been done, what has been proven to work time and time again, and then what are also some of the new safety assurance methods out there that can help supplement what's traditionally been done to make sure that you're efficiently achieving a safe design in your aircraft. That has been just a huge lessons learned to have that agility, like you said, in how you approach safety.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And then I think since you've addressed the human component quite well, on the technical side, I think we've learned it's really damn hard. These vehicles are marginal. It's just barely possible to build something that is mission capable with today's electrics technology. Now we all know those things are continuing to get better, right? Everybody wants to be in the game now because it's quite obvious that these things are going to continue to improve, and pretty soon they're not going to be marginal. They're going to be quite capable. But we at Archer often say this is the worst airplane we'll ever make, because it's just we're trying to make something viable at the very beginning of this, electrics technology curve. And I'm sure it's the same for you. But in that environment, you constantly get challenged on every safety feature or architectural decision. Do we really need to do this? It's costing us so much weight. It's costing us so much cost. And the ability to have a principled stance on, this is what we're trying to accomplish. Therefore, yes, we need to do this is essential, because otherwise you're always going to be, held hostage to just the sheer difficulty of it. And in my experience, the hardest part is keeping the design simple, because it's always easy to fix problems by adding stuff. We were talking about that at the procedural level all this morning, right? SMS is nothing but add more stuff to make more safety effort. And it works if you can afford it. And the same is true on the design side. You can always add another monitor. You can always add another redundancy. But at some point, you don't have a product anymore. So I think finding the right principled basis to make good decisions to get to a product that is effective and is safe is really the big challenge.
Should have heard the sigh over here from Ife. It was beautiful. Just that moment, it was like, oh.
Yeah, adding more stuff to make it safe. That's just like the default answer. But like you said, that's not necessarily going to achieve the most effective design. Yeah,
It is more difficult to make the safety happen in a simpler way. And you have to spend time to find a simple way to make something that's safe and mission capable.
No, I would agree 100%. Dash, in what you're doing with the DoD, what lessons have you learned in the work that you've done, and how are you applying those into the future?
Yeah, so when it comes to the lessons learned, since we are we don't own these aircrafts, and we are working with the companies through the Agility Primaries to certification. Whatever lessons these companies are learning, so are the lessons we are learning. But from a DoD perspective, we have certain other criteria that we have to ensure, national security when it comes to cybersecurity and stuff. We have to make sure because these are IoT and AI and all connected devices and stuff. So we have to make sure that there are we are able to overcome these from a DoD perspective. And that's something we realized over time that the companies have invested a lot of time on the technical side of building these aircrafts and stuff, but there are challenges on the cybersecurity piece, which over time in the last few years we have realized companies have realized that as well. So we work with them on trying ways to solve these challenges. In addition to that, DoD is its own market. And we have a challenge on our side to bring these aircrafts, show its capabilities to the other DoD agencies, and make sure that there is an end user for these aircrafts. So our big focus has been to ensure that we become a program of record, and for that we need to have end users within DoD really using these aircrafts for specific use cases and everything. So that's been a challenge to change the traditional operations using ground-based vehicles and air assets, and adding this to its to the technology as a use case. So we whatever the industry is facing, on the commercial side of things, we face it on the DoD side of things. So overall, every few months we find out something that we need to solve. And so it's not a new it's not new in any industry, especially when it starts out like this. Challenges are going to be there both on the safety and operation side of things. And this is where, earlier to your question on industry, partnerships, that's what we can help solve. So yeah.
Just add something on that. Dash, thanks for mentioning the cybersecurity element, because that is a fundamental area where it's going to be affecting it. It's something that's coming across the whole aviation industry. As the aircraft become more and more integrated, the data flows are much higher. And the EASA has recently released a new regulation for cybersecurity on aircraft, and that's something that we're diving straight into to make sure that at the very start, we're meeting the intent. Back to this, meeting the intent of the regulation the whole way from the very start and building that in. But having the regulator being, certainly in this case in the EASA, being quite advanced and pushing that through as a requirement. And they're also requiring that the management of cybersecurity is integrated into your management system. So you no longer have an SMS, a QMS, or this, or that, and that, and that. They're saying, link it all together. It's all the same intent. Let's build it together. And it's another way where the regulator is listening to what's happening in the operators and the manufacturers and helping us sew that together. I don't know what you guys are seeing in the US, but do you have something similar?
Yeah, with cybersecurity. Yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of work done in the past, and we kind of adopted a lot of those, what's been done in precedents for Part 25 and Part 29. And it's shown to be effective, and we incorporate that early, and we're in a position to meet those expectations. So it's been good.
So I know Dash is going to want to talk to this, but I want to get your input before I let Dash talk to this. We've seen the Department of Defense take a very keen interest in advanced air mobility over the last few years. One, why do you think that is? And two, what do you see coming out of that military partnership, and how does that play a role in the future of advanced air mobility?
I'm going to have to take the fifth because we're not part of the program. So we don't have a DoD.
You don't get to take the fifth. You're not American.
That is
We've partnered with AFWERX and Agility Prime, and it's been tremendous. I think we've been very pleased with the relationship and with the opportunities that they presented. And we hope to kind of continue that and grow that in the future for sure. I think they see the benefit that the vehicle brings to some of their objectives and operations, and we're in a position to hopefully satisfy those right now and then more so going forward. So.
Yeah, I second that. We've had some very positive interaction as well, and I think it's a trope that war is about logistics, not about combat, and so I think obviously the military is looking at how can they use this new mode of transportation to benefit their capabilities, and I don't think they necessarily know yet. And Dash can correct me here, but really exploring the capability of these vehicles and then thinking about how they change the battle space. If we look at what's happening in the Ukraine today, just the simple TV camera drone has completely changed the face of ground combat. And anybody who's paying attention knows that that's a big, big thing. So the ability to have an early view on these vehicles and what they're capable of today, what they may be capable of in the near future, is quite wise. And I think DoD is just trying to get ahead of that.
All right, Dash.
Yeah, I agree to that. And sometimes, technology is successful when there is an immediate need. So, the Ukraine is a good example of where there was an actual need and it was an urgent need. So, technology helps solve those problems and then comes out as a winner, which helps other technologies and related technologies also be successful. So, from a AppWorks and the Agility Prime program, as folks know, it was launched in 2020. The main focus, that we keep highlighting is, one, we wanted to lower the technical risk that these companies are going to face through collaboration. We bring in not just Air Force and Air Force SMEs to this, but we bring in DoD SMEs, we bring in other federal agencies that can help, solve the technical aspects of things. So basically, we are in this together. So we want to make sure that the companies are successful because, there's a notion that because it's DoD, our whole focus is going to be to see how eVTOLs are going to be focused on DoD needs. It's not that. It's dual use capability, and the primary use is commercial viability. So we want to ensure that the companies are able to have commercial viability. They're able to work with the regulatory bodies like FAA to get their certification and also have good use cases which can have community acceptance, public acceptance, and also make sure that the company is profitable and everything. So the commercial viability is the strength part here. In addition to that, through working with us, we are able to, address the regulatory risk. We are in, daily, weekly calls with the FAA, with the NASA to understand what needs to be done and how we can get it done. So, FAA is the regulatory body that makes regulations and decisions. You have NASA that focus on research. We see ourselves as the operational capability. We are ready to take the risk. We're ready to create a safe environment where companies can come and take risk and test out their technology and show the success both on the commercial side. And from the commercial side, we will identify use cases that will fit for military operations and warfighting capability. And so that's something that we are focusing through the program and through the partnerships. And then finally, the financial risk. We want to make sure that the startups, American startups, are successful. It helps the US economy. We want to ensure that what happened with small drones doesn't happen again. We don't, and we are not behind China in innovation, but leading ahead of them with boosting our startup companies, not by just giving them money, but also giving them the technical support and everything else they need to be successful. So the partnership has been amazing because through this, we have been able to not just bring the industry together, but also the overall DoD. So as mentioned, the use cases part, we have hundreds of use cases we have identified, but that doesn't mean we're going to test it for each and everything. We have to test it for the first few and make sure that there is success right there. And then whatever support we can provide on the commercial side of things by plugging with the state and local agencies, with the nonprofits, academia, we're also offering that support through our partnerships.
So in looking at this new technology, this new industry, we've been doing aviation for a little while. So one of the challenges we run into in the space is we get somewhat complacent. And sometimes we even get a little bit on the arrogant side. So seeing how this is evolving and looking at how it's being approached from your organizations, it's a fresh face looking at new ideas every day and learning new things for the first time. That being said, we look at the fact that there are known knowns, which those are the things we know. There are the known unknowns, things we know we don't know, but there are those things that we look at that are the unknown unknowns. And in that space, these are the things we don't know. So Looking at that from that perspective, how are your organizations preparing for and dealing with the unknown unknowns?
I think I proposed that question, so I guess I go first, right? Yeah, so two levels of that question that I think are important to address. One is in the more abstract sense, nobody's really operated this kind of vehicle in any meaningful way or at scale, especially. So I think there has to be a measure of gradualism and caution as how we roll out and operate these vehicles, whether it's your flight test approach or even your entry into service approach, because we will find scenarios that we didn't think about, right? Even with all the benefit of, decades and decades of helicopter flights and a century of fixed wing aviation, this is really different in many regards. And at least in my company, there's a lot of tech-minded people who was like, oh no, let's get this ready and roll it out, and then it's going to be great. But how many apps on your phone don't really work well after an update? We can't take that approach, right? We need to really be very sensible about how we approach expanding the envelope in the abstract sense, not just the literal flight test sense. And then the second layer is more in the design. There are many areas where our specialists, and you can tell me if it's different where you are, they tend to see a problem and solve exactly that problem. So, oh, if this happens, then this happens, and this is a problem. I'm going to implement a solution that stops that exact chain from happening. Great. However, if you stack up those point solutions to every individual problem you see, you end up with something very complicated and not very robust. Because if there's a minor difference in a scenario, it's not exactly what you conceived, all of your protections are not prepared for it. So I've made a somewhat of a reputation in my company for demanding, solve the fundamentals, don't solve the problem you see, remove the risk entirely. I know, but that's harder, that's more expensive, that's more weight. But it goes back to, have you actually come to something that's fundamentally safe, or do you have something that's fundamentally unsafe that then you're trying to band-aid over enough to make it safe enough? And as we mentioned before, these vehicles are so technically challenging just from a can it even work and fulfill mission, that is really hard.
Yeah, I think the to come back to the unknown unknowns bit and what you were just saying there, I think part of the challenge is to be ready to react. Because if you're in this fixed mindset where you have a fixed program and a fixed timeline and everything else, and there's so much challenge of delivering that bit, that the moment you come across one of your unknown unknowns, and suddenly it becomes a known unknown, or a known known, or whatever you want to go. I mean, you could go all Rumsfeldian on this one, but actually the challenge is to be able to take it, to learn why, to go back to the bottom bit, not just band-aid, but come back to why, and make sure you address it in a way that everyone's ready to react and support each other. So we don't just transfer the problem to somebody else, and then that suddenly just gets knocked down the chain, and the poor operator or the maintainer is left holding a very complex solution because we couldn't take the time to understand really why it happened at the front end. So I think we're going to be finding them all the way. There's like any new thing, you learn as you go. And I think it was Tom, I think you mentioned earlier on crawl, walk, run, which comes back to your timeline. We're going to have to do a bit of crawling first as we start to learn to fly these things and start, that's what the flight test campaign's about. And then we go into the walking, and then we go into the running.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think what you guys are saying, I hear is a safety culture at the company that is able to incorporate and adapt to whatever may be thrown at them, and that's extremely important. And I think that's how you can deal with a lot of the unknowns is create a culture in your company that's accepting of those unknowns, and that actually attempts to position themselves such that we have already developed an infrastructure or an architecture that can accommodate some of that. And one of the things we talked about as a panel was understanding what the minimum safety requirement may be from the FAA, but also striving for something beyond that. And here at Joby, we really take that seriously, that we want our bar to be much higher than what may be imposed by a regulator. such that the act of showing compliance is a natural outflow of what we're already doing as a company. And I think that's the most effective way to go. And then you get this buffer between what may be the minimum standard and what you're doing as a company. That buffer can account for some of the unknowns. And, you know, some of the unknowns may be the FAA may call you and say, hey, I have a new requirement for you. And that's no unknown that you have to be adapting to. And you have to try to position yourself as a company to be able to accept that. And I think a major part of that is having a very healthy safety culture that permeates not just from the safety team, but all the designers and any stakeholder associated with the product. And that was something that, you know, JoeBen was very intentional about when the company started to pivot from a prototyping R&D, you know, house in, you know, Silicon Valley to an aircraft manufacturer to embody this idea. And we're still growing in that, but we've made significant headways that helps position us to account for the unknown unknowns.
Dash, any thoughts?
Nothing much to add, but all three, that is known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns, are all going to decide our timeline on the technology to be successful. Just because it's a known unknown or a known known doesn't mean it's going to be solved faster. The hurdles are still going to be same. An example, as I mentioned, was supply chain. We know that's a challenge, but it's not easy to solve it, and it'll take time. But meantime, the unknown unknowns from the safety side of things is something that these aircrafts haven't gone through that level of years of testing that we can go back and say that you know, it's going to be 100% safe and efficient. We have a lot that the companies are working towards, you know, every day. And not being on the company's side, you know, specifically talking on behalf of the companies, I see the struggle, I see the challenge, and it's amazing to see how they are working together, working with the regulatory bodies, and trying to solve those. So overall, the biggest thing we need to ensure safety is patience. We have to give the companies its time to solve these problems, as well as the regulatory bodies and decision makers to you know, grasp and adapt and adopt to that you know, on the regulatory side and stuff. So it's going to be a challenge from both sides, but just because they are known unknowns, we shouldn't be thinking it's going to be anything easier.
No, I agree. So I'd like to open it up now for the audience. If you have any questions that you would like to ask this panel, please raise your hand. We'll get a microphone in front of you as quick as we can. Any questions for our panel at this point?
I'm right here, so we'll kick straight off for the first question.
Since he's right here. Thank you. I wanted to get this one out earlier in the earlier panel about SMS. Will Williams, UPS Flight Forward. So the subject of flight data monitoring has come up a few times for safety assurance, right? And in my experience, that's been one of the hardest and most expensive pieces of SMS. Because a lot of times it's an add-on, right? Like the subject of adding on SMS. Are the OEMs looking at an easier way to capture that data for the eventual operator, so they don't have to go buy software and things after that? Are you looking at that now? So we're fitting FDM to our aircraft. So we're capturing all the data, because it's interesting actually when you start looking at data, it's one bit of data that's used many times rather than capturing lots of different bits of data for individual uses. So you've got, I mean, and it's very much the same in the helicopter world right now. You've got HUMS, you've got FDM. It's the same data you're capturing. You're just using it either for a maintenance focus or an operational safety focus. So we're already identifying all the data we need to capture and making sure we can take that off the aircraft. We're then looking at how we then manage data centrally, globally, because there's a lot of it that's going to be coming off our aircraft. I think we're all the same in that regard. And I know certainly Dave from Wisk, you'll be gathering even more than us because you're going autonomous. But yeah, so there's lots of data coming off. How we then allow the operators to access that data very simply and so some operators will have their own FDM program up and running, and they're going to want to put it into their own system. That's fine. Other operators won't have an FDM system, and will therefore look for some more support in terms of how to manage it, or is there a preferred software tool that you use to analyze it? And this is again where that partnership and that mentoring comes in, because we can say, well, actually, these we think are the best triggers, these are the best alert levels, etc., and we can start to share the good practice for setting up. So that's our FDM approach, if that helps.
Yeah, definitely, it's part and parcel. Just the ability to gather data and to analyze it is so crucial. And yes, that's just an inherent attribute of our architecting our aircraft. And again, being both design and operator, that there's an easy transition to accommodate that data. And also how you mine and process the data analytics part of it is another big aspect of how do you, it's one thing to get the data, it's another thing to be able to go through it efficiently and to derive the needed
I think-
information.
Sorry, just to add on to that, I think that's a really important point. And you talk about new technologies. It's not just the new technologies on the aircraft that are allowing us to do what we do. It's new technologies off the aircraft. So we've got a partnership with Palantir, which is one of the big sort of data mining, data exploitation companies. And we're actively already looking at working with them on looking at, okay, how do we look at the safety side of it? So that already looking at all these different opportunities to use the big data, AI, machine learning, whatever phrase you want to put with it. And that's a new technology that's being harnessed in different areas.
Yeah, I think you guys have covered the essentials. Archer is also going to be an operator, same as Joby. So we are, self-incentivized to do something for ourselves there. Naturally, the actual product lends itself to data capture. I think all of us are full fly-by-wire, electronic controls, propulsion controls are integrated to that. So the information's all there. It doesn't have to be added, right? It just has to be collected and used intelligently. So yeah, I think we're all on the path to doing more with that than the baseline.
I think we have another question at the back
Good.
there.
Hi, this is Rangan Ramasamy from FAA. So I have two questions/comments to make. The first one is for the gentleman from Joby. I don't mean to put you in spot, but I've been keenly following the eVTOL development, right? So, but what really disturbed me was that there was an accident of Joby in experimental phase, and I went through the NTSB report, and it says component failure, right? So to me, as a aircraft system engineer and certainly as a regulator, that is the least satisfying answer, right? Maybe you didn't want to share, that is perfectly fine, but I mean, that's number one, right? So do you have anything to add?
Yeah,
on that?
absolutely. Yeah, so yeah, we experienced that accident, and we're very fortunate to be operating remotely, so there was no injury associated with that. But yeah, we've been working closely with the NTSB and the accident investigators, and they actually are the ones that govern what gets put out and gets released publicly. And so we're still working with them, and we continue to support them in any way that we can.
Right. So let me reiterate my concern, right? You got thousands of components in the thing, and you're saying component failure caused the whole problem. So again, to me, it's least satisfactory. Maybe for other reasons you don't want to share. That's why I wouldn't go more on that. The second point is somebody from Department of Defense mentioned about being very careful about your component quality that you use, right? So just because it's an electronic part, you still have to have very rigid selection criteria, quality criteria about the component that goes in. So those are my two comments. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We're just going to run out of time. John, did you want to say something quickly? I'll come around with a microphone. Okay, we're going to wrap up. I do have a rhetorical question for you guys, which I'll come to, because I'm hoping my question, you give the answer. That'll be the segue to the next session. He says confidently. I got 1 minute left. Is it going to be too long? Is it? Okay. All right, 1 minute left. It's fascinating. Jim and myself visited a little helicopter operator in Italy some year ago, right? I was talking to these guys and they're saying, hey man, this whole drone industry is killing our business, right? We've lost 50% of our revenue. They were in the filming business and, you know, and a lot of the industry, and when I say the traditional helicopter industry, looks at this segment of the market and says, it's coming to take our jobs. It's the future, but you know, how do we grapple with that? And of course, the rhetorical question that is, it's a minefield if BV loss, EV loss, RPAS, you name it. The guys are going like, wow, what is it? How do we bring these two fundamentally different industries together to enhance not only our business, but to enhance safety of the industry? Bit of a high level question, but that's my question to anybody who's prepared to kind of answer it.
Oh, how generous. Yeah, I'll go first.
I think there's a bit of a trend here. You have to go
I would say that these new kinds of vehicles enable certain operations that are not possible or desirable with conventional helicopters. Particularly noise is the driving factor behind that distinction. So I would look at it from our industry is initially going to fill a space that is just not possible to address with current technology. I expect that over time and with, you know, the electrics becoming more mature and more capable, eventually these kinds of vehicles will be able to encroach on spaces that are traditionally helicopter, but just the endurance and range of a conventional helicopter is going to keep those, you know, those kinds of missions out of reach for our aircraft for a good while. So I don't think there's a threat there in the sense of coming to take your job in the short term. And in the long term, we're going to converge to a best of both worlds. You know, we saw yesterday, I think, electric, you know, emergency power system for a conventional helicopter. That kind of convergence, I think, is also inevitable. And all the things we learn are going to go inform how to improve the existing helicopter and vice versa, as we're learning from their experience every day. So I don't really see it as a, you know, breaking into our space thing, rather something new that's coming up, and then eventually we'll converge.
Yeah, it's definitely not a Blockbuster or Netflix type thing. You know, and to that point, I believe at some point there was a company trying to turn a R22 or R44 into an electric, and so you really see a convergence of both, and I think that's what the future is going to hold. And I think there's an opportunity for learning from the rotorcraft and helicopter operations that I don't know if we fully tapped into yet as an industry, and I think part of that might be because of this idea of encroachment. But I would definitely desire to see a big exchange of information and learning and development, because you know one of the leading cause of accidents is low altitude operations, and that's something that eVTOL are inherently going to do. And if the community that has been doing that for decades and decades is still showing that to be a leading cause, that's definitely something that we want to be aware of and learn from the experiences that are, you know, learned in blood, and so that we don't experience those same type of things.
And do you think there's a little bit of a disconnect between the two industries at the moment? Do you think that can improve?
Say that again.
Do you think there's a little bit of a disconnect between the two industries that we could better learn from?
Yeah, I think there's improvement there. I don't think we've fully tapped the full interchange between the two.
No, I think it's interesting because it's not a zero-sum game. But it's not that every bit of market that eVTOL takes is a loss for the helicopter market. It's not zero-sum. So I think that's probably a little bit of recognition that actually we can lift each other up, you know, through the technologies, through the approaches, through the way we manage safety, through the communication and collaboration, learning from each other. There's going to be some amazing technologies. They're going to have read across back into the helicopter world. There's going to be technologies in the helicopter world that we're going to embrace. So I think it's not a zero-sum game in that regard. And I think even fixed wing as well. it's not just helicopter operations and eVTOL. You know, just because we take off vertically doesn't mean that the lessons from fixed wing aren't equally as applicable.
I think I think for me, that was the valuable point that Jim and I raised with that helicopter operator. We don't understand all of this fancy technology coming here with your drones and there's a lot of heat and energy and money going in behind all of this development, and it's going very rapidly. We don't understand. Our point was get on board with it and get on board with it quickly, because there is a place for both in our estimation. And I work in an organization that is providing full turnkey vertical lift solutions. That includes RPAS and helicopters, where there's a need for it, right? So you could use RPAS for the search functionality, we could use the helicopter for the rescue functionality at this stage. So for me, it's not a zero-sum game. And that's the point I was trying to get across, because we've seen several operators who are very nervous of this, right? So, and I think the rhetorical part of my question was, how do we improve that disconnect? The answer is this forum,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I think the easiest way to look at it is aviation as a whole is a toolbox. You have a hammer, you have a screwdriver, you have a crescent wrench. This now adds a socket set. You're not going to throw away your hammer, your screwdriver, and your crescent wrench just because we added another tool. Each tool has a specific purpose and does it really, really well.
Yeah.
You can use a screwdriver as a hammer, but it's probably not going to last really long. So
can
just
speak to
think
my
of it,
son.
each
I have
one is
done,
a
yeah.
specialized tool.
Yeah, I have done that. Yeah. We've run out of time, guys. So again, questions will follow. This is being recorded, so anybody who wants to watch it afterwards. And Emily's email is on the site if you want to ask further questions. So thanks very much. I want to thank the team here, led by Rex. Round of applause for them. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, we're going to go into the next session. And the segue for that was loosely connected to the priorities of the leadership of the associations that are here and represented. And right now we've got Peter Bunce from Gamma coming up. We've got Jim Viola from HI and Christian Muller from EHA. They're coming up. And Mike Hirschberg is here. There we go. We're going to do a little bit of a hybrid on this one. So what we're going to do is probably have Peter go first. He's got some slides I think he wants to show. Peter, you happy to go first? Yeah. And you could talk to the slides. I think then we're going to make it a fireside chat, right? We're going to kind of go through it. The theme of this is the priorities for the organizations. What are we prioritizing? What's in the pipeline? What are we looking at next 12 to 18 months? So I think that's the theme of it. So, but if you're happy to jump up now, give us 5-10 minutes of your presentation, and then we'll lead into a discussion with the remainder. Thank you.
Oh, good afternoon. It's great to be with you all, and it's great to see so many of our colleagues from our authorities across the pond and here in the U.S. and my colleagues that we work with closely. As you know, Gamma represents the manufacturers, both airframe OEMs, engine, avionics, down to about third-tier suppliers, and then large maintenance organizations. We have offices in DC and in Brussels. So if you want to just run the slides, I'm going to go through these very quickly just to level set everyone. So, you know, Gamma has everything from Boeing and Airbus corporate jets all the way down into this exciting area of advanced air mobility. We had a lot of the Gamma board at Zipline last week over in Bentonville, taking a look at some amazing technology that they're using to deliver packages from Walmart. And those of you who paid attention, they're delivering medicines, cooled medicines like vaccines and everything throughout the country of Ghana, launching a lot of different aircraft. So it's an exciting time with a lot of different vehicles. Next slide, please. So our priorities as we go into next year, as with everybody, workforce is a huge issue, supply chain. Folks are all very interested in that and what we can do as an industry to be able to go and bring young people into the industry, work some of the supply chain issues. But really, we have an opportunity with FAA reauthorization next year to be able to do some things to really try to make the FAA work for the industry in a very resource constrained world. At the same time, we have a change in leadership at EASA. The executive director, Patrick Key, will be retiring from his role as second term there as executive director. So we'll have new leadership at EASA, which we have to go and work that hard as an industry to be able to work with John and his colleagues to be able to go ahead and keep general and business aviation all at the forefront of innovation and change. And that's happening a lot in that across the pond as it is in North America and South America. Next slide, please. So if you look at how we work certifying aircraft and our relationships all over the world, we work with basically now 5 states of design. EASA represents Europe, FAA in North America, TCCA in Canada, ANAC in Brazil, and now the UKCAA is standing up. So those are the 5 recognized Western states of design. You can always talk about China, but we're not focusing a lot there because it'll be very hard right now. It's just not a mature state of design. But how we implement things back and forth is not as a group of 5 different authorities. It's actually through bilateral safety agreements between one another. So there's agreements between US and Canada, Canada and Europe, so forth and so on. So making the bilateral agreements work, which right now they're not working. It's almost, it's very difficult to get validation of products back and forth across the Atlantic. And it's quite frankly, the authorities are not implementing what they've agreed to in what's called the TIP, the Technical Implementation Procedures for the bilateral, which calls for a work plan to be produced up front. The authorities just aren't doing it. And we as far as GAMA, working with our other sister associations, we're going to start forcing the FAA to start doing what they agreed to do and try to do the same thing, forcing on EASA through the European Commission to do what they signed up to do, because right now it's debilitating the industry. And we just heard from new companies that are going into this area, they aren't going to be able to validate products unless the authorities get this right. Next slide, please. You know, I focus on the US and EASA relationship, but the relationship with Transport Canada is a chocolate mess right now. They have underfunded their regulatory body to such an extent right now, they're drastically increasing fees and charges north of the border, hopefully to address it, but we don't even know if that increase in fees are going to go back into increasing the manning up in Transport Canada. So that out of all the authorities, Transport Canada is just an absolute mess. When we look at electric and hybrid propulsion, one of the things that I know that Jim and Mike and I are working on closely, but we have the same problems in Europe is, well, how do we define AAM? We went and changed the term urban air mobility to advanced air mobility at the request of Chairman Larson up on the Hill, who said, hey, this type of transportation needs to apply to rural America just as much as it needs to apply to cities and everything. So we started looking at that. Well, everybody loves that term now, AAM, that the unmanned community, the UAS community has adopted that term, and now everybody's confused at what it means. The controllers are confused. I was with the head of the Air Traffic Control Association, NACA, the other day, and he was saying, oh my goodness, how are we going to control these millions of drones that are operating under 400 feet? And I go, you're not. That's not, but he goes, well, that's AAM. And I go, yeah, but that's a different part of it. And that's what UTM is for, and that's what we're going to work on. So there is just mass confusion out there. So one of the things that we're going to be working with our colleagues here is being able to put some smarter definitions. If you go to the next slide, because there are, if you look at all of these vehicles out there, there are some that are eVTOL, but they may carry passengers, they may carry cargo, and then they may become autonomous. So they may become a crewed type of platform to eventually an autonomous platform, and that is then an uncrewed aerial system. So to be able to put all of these different parts, you know, the CTOL, the conventional takeoff and landing, the short takeoff and landing, all into bins so that people can understand what we're talking about. Next slide. If we start to go and start to put some heft behind what we're talking about there, whether we're talking heavy UAS that has to be certified through a process. We have VTOL, we have short takeoff and landing, we have CTOL. Everybody probably saw that Alice flew last week for the first time up at Moses Lake. 8,000 pounds of battery on a 9-passenger aircraft. 8,000 pounds. That's a lot of battery. Right now, we're struggling with energy power density in our batteries. We all know we've got to work on that. So we're trying to put some rigor in being able to define this. this group. If you go to the next slide, and we've got a good core group to do this. Back when Gamma started what we call the Electric Propulsion and Innovation Committee back in 2015, these were the first 11 members that signed up. And Gamma, one of the things that I love about it, I've been doing it for 17 and a half years, is you get competitors. I get Dassault and Gulfstream and Bombardier all in the room. They just work together. They've never had a competitive issue when they get in the room together. But we wanted to do and foster the same thing with a lot of startup companies, but then traditional companies. And then if you look, next slide, you look at today, our largest committee now is the EPIC committee, and with 119 companies all part of that. So, you know, if you are in aerospace, you care about this segment of aviation. And that's why I'm so excited. This has to be what the dawn of the jet age must have been like. With all the excitement in the industry. And I know all of us are very encouraged. And I think there was a question in the last one. You know, as a rotorcraft operator, owner, OEM and everything, I wouldn't worry at all about this. This is just going to grow aerospace and the capability that we have out there and give us capability and systems, autonomy. You know, we've been working, I know all of us have been trying to talk to the NTSB saying, why are we thinking about heavyweight flight data recorders that are forensic analysis after an accident instead of using modern technology where everybody can afford to put it on board? And we have so many ways of pumping out the information now that is far better than a heavyweight flight data recorder. And hopefully they're listening. It's a bureaucracy that's slow, you know, to be able to move, but we're all working toward that end. Next slide. So one of the things also that we've got to do, and I know all of us are very concerned about what we're seeing up in New York City right now, is this is the worst time to be thinking about giving up any of the incredible infrastructure that we have in the US. And if you look at whether we're talking the heliports in New York or Reed Hillville out in California, where they're using the unleaded avgas quest to be able to, as an excuse to shut the airport, which is really what they're doing. We cannot give up this infrastructure because we're at a point where we can go ahead and really start using this. This is where we can dig up ground, start to put in lines that are able to recharge in a very rapid rate this electric revolution that we're going through, and also to be able to distribute the hydrogen that we're going to need to be able to power fuel cells and beyond if we're ever able to get to liquid hydrogen. So next slide, this is just the last one. I always love this quote, but I also love the picture that Da Vinci drew in his concept. We all know he never flew, but it was a vertical lift type of machine that he conceptualized back then. And there's no better quote, and why we all love being in this industry and the people that are in it. And so with that, I'll pass it on to my colleagues.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. Very interesting insight there. And as you quite rightly say, there's mass confusion. I mean, I was alluding to that earlier. What does it mean? And what does it mean to us as a traditional roadcraft industry, and how do we work together? So let me lead with yourself, Jim. Let's have a discussion, and then I'll open up to the floor. Before I go to Jim, are there any questions for Peter on Gamma? Anything online? There is. Oh, 1 second, I shall be back. Have you got a mic? You haven't got it? No. Okay, they've lost it. Let's have a look. Let's go to you, Jim. So what we'll do is we'll go through and we'll just talk about priorities for the next 12 months or so. We'll go through everybody for those priorities, and then we'll come back. We'll do some Q&A. If that's okay.
No, thank you very much, and thanks everybody for being here. It's, you know, as you know, Pete covered there. We certainly liked his slides where it just shows that all the stuff that's out there and continues to evolve. And you know, again, like we heard last time, I think, you know, I'm really excited about the additional things that are coming into our community, the additional tools. When you talk about vertical flight, when you talk about helicopters and how they're put to use. So, you know, the challenges that we have as we're incorporating these new technologies is to learn across the board. And I think, you know, certainly these last 2 days and today start talking about how that interface happens. How do you keep getting the best of the best and applying it to what we're going to do with vertical flight of the future, and how that helps society. I mean, people know down in Florida, they're happy to see the helicopters last week after the hurricane went through there and all the great things they did. So these additional capabilities, and as Pete said, you know, I got to see Zipline in action, and they were still operating totally under 107 rule. There was all line of sight. We're able to stand on the hilltop on the tower and actually walk to where it made a little dip to actually drop the package. And the good things they're doing in other countries. So I'm just real excited. So far as priorities right now, it's trying to maximize everybody working together and sharing the technologies for across all the vehicles we currently have, and how the helicopters are done. The infrastructure, Pete talked about that as well. When you saw all the general aviation points of contact, the heliports, vertiports, the future vertiports, we just can't go backwards because we do bring such a great, asset to society.
And I know, look, I'm now living in a country that spans 3 time zones, has 300 million people and 17,500 islands that are mostly inaccessible by aircraft or even helicopter. And so this technology is going to open up certain areas of the world. I know you talked about the infrastructure here is massive. Let's not let that go. Let's use that to our advantage. And across Europe, it's the same thing, but in more remote areas in South America and Africa and Southeast Asia, where I live, this is the dawn of the jet age or the eVTOL age, whatever you want to call it. So I see there's massive value in that, and there's trying to get everybody on board with it, trying to get the regulators to keep up with it, particularly some of those developing nations that don't have the budget, they don't have the money to keep up. And it's this sort of conference that helps spread that message. Mike, let's go to yourself then, in terms of what you're looking for in the next 12 months. The priority.
Great, thanks so much. So Mike Hirschberg, Vertical Flight Society. For those of you who don't know us, we were formed in 1943 as American Helicopter Society, but even from the beginning, it was much more than just helicopters and much more than just American. So we officially changed the name in 2018 to the Vertical Flight Society, and it's everything. It's helicopters, it's drones, it's Joint Strike Fighter, Future Vertical Lift, and we're not an association. We're a professional membership society, an educational membership society, and we look for technologies and turning points and see how we can capitalize on that to something that benefits vertical flight. So our tagline is advancing vertical flight. And Abraham Lincoln is attributed to have said, that the best way to predict the future is to invent it or create it. And that's kind of what we look at, different things. We first started working on eVTOL in 2013. Since we're having our 10th annual workshop in January. And even, back then I'm like, based on everything this is impossible. This will never work. But based on everything you don't know, it's really going to happen. There's 1,000 reasons why eVTOL or advanced air mobility, won't work. So we've got to find solutions to all of them. We are, we don't work with the regulator. We're more with, NASA and the technology development. So we're very grateful to work with GAMA and HAI and the other associations. And we really complement each other very well. And a few years ago, we started an air mobility council between the different associations, and that's one of the things I'd like to do in this coming year is Pete and everybody to work more with you guys, and so we can bring all the we all each represent hundreds of companies, but we can also bring ourselves together in an air mobility council and talk to NASA or talk to FAA and say, here's a group of associations that represent the entire industry. Similar to looking at eVTOL almost 10 years ago, we had the first, as far as we know, it's the first conference or workshop on hydrogen for aviation in North America. In Europe, hydrogen, it's getting a lot of funding, a lot of government funding, a lot of interest and development. In the US, there's very close to zero federal dollars going into hydrogen for aviation. Luckily, hydrogen, it's safe. It's been demonstrated. It's used for ground transportation. We mentioned yesterday, the biggest user of hydrogen in the world is Plug Power with all the forklifts. Something like 1/3 of the food in the U.S. is moved by hydrogen-powered forklifts. So, there are, just like with eVTOL, there's tons of technical and programmatic and regulatory and all kinds of challenges to make hydrogen viable for aviation. In Europe, they've been flying, H2Fly has been flying their hydrogen-powered aircraft for several years, manned flights, very promising technology. The US, way behind. But like I said, looking at these technologies and looking at these new capabilities is really exciting. And combining all our forces, we can look and identify all the problems, all the challenges, and how to adapt. Also, things like promoting the adoption of single engine IFR, having lower cost helicopters become more ubiquitous, and facilitate the ubiquitous use of IFR for safety. Low level infrastructure for IFR operations, things like this are really important. We again look forward to working with the other associations in promoting that adoption.
Thank you, Mike. That sounds like actually a busy 12 months you were coming up there. It's really important, and I think you jumped on the words there, how we work together to achieve that. And I think that's the important takeaway. For me, I've heard literally every day of this conference is how do we work effectively together because it's good for all of us. It's good for all of us. As I said right at the beginning, whether you design them, build them, maintain them, fly them, operate them, doesn't matter. It's good for all of us. Peter, you've given us a quick breakdown on the slides there. Did you want to touch on some highlights over the next 12 months, what you guys are focusing on? You were on transmits. We got a lot of information there, but if you can hit some of those highlights for us on what you guys are looking at for the next 12 months. Is that on? Yes, little ON OFF switch. There we go.
Test.
There we
Okay,
go.
sorry about that. So let's go up to about 50,000 feet and just talk, because it's an FAA reauthorization year. We're going to be reacting to what happens in the congressional elections, the midterm elections. I fully anticipate that the Republicans will take control of the House. That'll put Sam Graves at the head of the House Transportation Committee going into a reauthorization year. On the Democrat side, it's going to be a tussle between Rick Larsen and Eleanor Holmes Norton, who gets the chairmanship there. But in any case, we know that the leadership there wants to get an FAA reauthorization bill and not have a whole bunch of extensions and everything. So there's impetus on the House side. On the Senate side, who knows what's going to happen, which party's going to have the majority, but Senator Cruz will move up to the senior Republican position. Senator Cantwell will probably remain in there. They're both proponents of aerospace. So we think we can get an FAA reauthorization bill. So now what can we do in FAA reauthorization? Well, right now, the FAA is under resourced. There's no question about it. The numbers were surprising to me. They spent over $60 million just cleaning facilities last year. And that was unprogrammed money. So all of that money was taken away from doing other things. We're throwing more things at them. We're throwing all of this stuff we just have been talking about at them. At the same time, we're throwing commercial space at them. Folks are working from home, which makes them, in my mind, far less efficient than they should be. They aren't able to collaborate. In my world of certification, but this goes across the flight standards, 40% of the FAA workforce is less than 3 years regulating. They're brand new. If they can't work together and learn from each other by being in the same offices together, how are they ever going to regulate our industry properly? Those of you that have tried to register aircraft out there, the registry is broken. It's taking 9 months to a year to register an aircraft that should be a push of a button. And there's no excuse for that. And it's because they're working from home and there's not accountability out there for the workforce. And so one of the things we are all going to push for, all the associations work for, is that there are already laws passed back in the late 90s that give FAA some personnel reform areas and procurement reform areas that have never been implemented because of the Department of Transportation and the Office of Management budget over multiple administrations. So we are going to really try to emphasize how broken things are. And it's not because the FAA has poor leadership. I think we've got very good leadership in the FAA. We have not given tools to the FAA leadership to be able to properly lead and manage the organization. Let me give you one example. Recently, I found out that they are having a hard time getting good people to take managerial positions, because if they go and become managers, they will make less than the people that they will manage, because they're up against bonus and salary caps right now. That's a broken system when you can't get good people to lead. We've got to fix this as a country, or aerospace is going to start falling behind. And make no doubt about it, there is a competition between Europe and the US right now, especially in this area of advanced air mobility, but all over the world in just leadership in aerospace. And being an association where we work on both sides of the Atlantic, we encourage that competition because we want them to move faster. They're never moving fast enough. And if EASA is leading in an area, I'm applauding them. And if FAA is leading, but we want to push all the authorities to be able to work faster, because right now it's slowing down. It's grinding to a halt. The MAX effect over the Boeing MAX and the results of that also is having a negative impact. So those are the high level things that we're going to be addressing in the next year.
Thank you, Peter. Really interesting information. I'm going to go to yourself, Christian, just to look at what the European Helicopter Association's plans are over the next 12 months or so, what those sort of high-level plans are.
Yeah, I think for us, or for me, it will be awareness. And what do I mean with that? I mean three things: awareness. First of all, awareness on, on our industry in Europe in general. We have European roadshows next month, so this is a place where we can showcase our industry, and I think it's really important that we do that. And also as a European industry, because we have, a very interesting, a very good industry, and we need to be able to communicate that. Awareness also about what the helicopter industry does for communities. We need to shape the perception of the general public on what the helicopters do. Now, in difference to here in the United States, the helicopter in Europe is perceived very differently, in a probably more negative way than here. It's basically you transport VIPs in a very plush helicopter from their private jet to their yacht. And that's basically what they believe helicopters do in Europe. And we can see the outpouring of that. You have noise issues, you have any kind of performance issues. Thierry from Paris can, talk about some of the stories that he's going through. So we need to change the perception of the general public. We assume that people just accept helicopters as something positive. They think that, of course, helicopters do a good thing, but actually that's not the case. If you look at the latest generation, they say, what are you doing? Why do you fly helicopters? They pollute, they make noise. Why? So we need to raise awareness, and awareness that is really important. And then we also need to raise awareness in Europe about the issues we face. And I'm really glad, Peter, that you said 9 months to actually get something registered. We believe 3 months is already a long time, and of an aircraft that is already on the register in another EASA country. And that is also broken. We need to raise awareness as well with the oversight and the authorities to make sure that we're actually having an industry that can work, that have, capabilities and a framework within which they can earn money, they can do the job. And then, when we start to shape the dialogue, we're able to integrate the VTOL community as well. And we need to raise awareness finally to make sure that people understand that electric is not a cure for all. It just isn't. We need to make sure that we have an infrastructure, and I think it was great that you pointed out the infrastructure that we have. We have distribution possibilities for sustainable aviation fuel. We have already a lot of technologies that we can actually become more sustainable in the industry as we are. And that is, for me, a really important part, because if we don't raise awareness of what we already have, people will just focus on one solution only, and that will deprive us from, maintaining our capabilities. And I think we really need to make sure that the wider public understands this. So awareness.
Thank you. I
is
mean,
what I do.
I know there's a lot of improvement to be made, particularly working with the regulators. All I can say is you're lucky you're not working in a developing nation. There's a lot more work to do in that area. And to be honest with you, I mean, I say that in jest, but I do mean it seriously, right? The whole purpose of me sitting on the board of HII as International Advisor is to bring this thinking closer to that community, to those communities with Southeast Africa, Australia, South America, where those are, the way that the regulatory bodies are structured, the way their funding is structured is intrinsically different. They just don't have the money. They don't have any of the resources. So therefore, as a company trying to develop fully integrated RPAS into a helicopter operation, it's a massive struggle for me, a massive struggle because the regulation isn't there. As soon as rather than allow you to do anything, they just shut you down. So you know, it curbs development of the industry. We've got all this heat and energy behind the industry, all this money going in to develop eVTOL, and we need regulation to keep up with it. So I think it's a really important point.
But I would also think there's opportunity there. If you think about the developing world and how, you know, when we went into telecommunications, all of a sudden they didn't have to lay all the lines and everything else. We could go to a cellular backbone. If we think about this, and whether it's Europe or US lead in development of UTM infrastructure, if we expect governments to build it, it's going to take forever.
Yeah.
But if we allow private industry to build it and figure out how it can integrate with existing systems out there, that's really, to me, the way of the future. And technology now can handle thousands upon thousands of vehicles operating together and do it safely and keep things separated. But it's Europe and the US have to really go and make it happen and have them integrate with the ANSPs that are out there to be able to show it can be done and done safely.
Exactly, because those developing nations mostly rely on either an FAA model or an EASA model, by and large. I'll pause there. Questions? You had a good lunch, obviously.
I'd actually like to comment, make a comment on something that Christian said. So, you know, electric is not the panacea. There are some, I'll say, niche cases compared to what the helicopter industry does, where where there's reasons to do it. If you're going to hover for a long time, or you want to have, you know, good range and payload, things like that, you know, eVTOL is probably not the thing you need, right? So batteries, we talked about the weight of batteries. I mean, batteries suck when compared to the energy density of, you know, kerosene or avgas or you know, especially hydrogen. So there's cases, if you want to have something that's potentially 100 times quieter than a helicopter, or 100 or 1,000 times, you know, safer, 10 to the minus ninth to a helicopter, you know, there's you know, it appears that this should be able to do that after we work out of the bug. So I co-chair the VAST technology working group with Cliff Johnson from the FAA, and we're looking at, you know, the technology and the failure. We know, you know, there's no new ways to crash a helicopter. We know how helicopters fail, and we know how to address them. We really don't know for eVTOL. So just, you know, one more thing on our priorities for the upcoming year is through the VAST technology working group, is we did a survey of safety enhancing technologies, things like things like flying IFR and things like that. And so we're going to be analyzing with the FAA, analyzing the data that comes back on that and where to place emphasis for 2023.
Thank you. And I want to come back to a point that was raised both by Jim and by Christian, which is how do we work effectively together? And I'm going to ask everybody here, who bought an airline ticket to come here? Hands up. Who bought an airline ticket to come here? How expensive was your ticket? Astronomical, right? Particularly, Vicky, you came from New Zealand. When I came from Bali, I had to take out a mortgage to get a ticket here. So, and we don't have it in our budgets, right? So the question to the panel, and we can start with Jim possibly, what are we doing? What are the organizations doing to try and create some sort of joint events so we can actually prevent duplication of effort, have a singular conversation, drive things in a joined up way?
Well, joint events, it's certainly, I know one of the things we're trying to do with HAI right now is challenge staff to find out what are all the vertical aviation related events for the next 3 to 5 years. So if you're planning an event, we want to try to run a master calendar. So number one,
is deconfliction is what everybody tried to do before, is not have them overlapping. I mean, that was what happened for me this week. You know, I came here, it was halfway across the United States, so I figured I could also knock out something in San Diego last night, yesterday with Saffron Engines, and then back today. So by having that and then pairing even this event, you know, we've partnered with the FAA. The FAA had this event every other year. We want to make sure the success and what was being accomplished at this event continues to be accomplished. But what is the best way to do that efficiently and effectively for everybody? You know, where do you join them? How often do you have them? I think during the pandemic, we had some lessons learned now of you know, how often do you have to have the in-person? Because you can actually keep the conversation, the safety conversation going, I think virtually now, and have maybe less in-person, save some of that travel time and get a little more time at home with the family.
I agree. John, I'm going to jump on you quickly. Just come back to what you were doing. There's a microphone right next to you conveniently. Turn the OFF switch on.
You've been
Okay, got
tagged.
it. Yeah, there you
I'm an engineer. I spent my lifetime telling pilots it was OFF.
Right, so we're having a conversation over. Yes, that was me. Thank you. Point taken. Right, so can you just highlight what you've been doing in terms of communication, trying to reach the front line? I think what we're doing is we've got the leadership sitting here, and guys, this is an opportunity for you to sit and talk to each and ask questions, right? So I want to take advantage of that because we've got another 10 minutes to go, 5 minutes to go. But I want you just to briefly talk about what you've been doing and also what you've been doing through social media and communications to try and reach the front line with stretched budgets, limited travel.
Yeah, so it was interesting. So one of the challenges we've had is the EASA, certainly, maybe it's a general regulator thing, is our solution used to consist of a PDF document of a various number of pages. And then we would say, there you go, on you go, do whatever with that. And one of the big things we learned since we started our safety promotion team and our new strategy sort of 2.5 years ago is that people get sick of me making funnel symbols with my hands, and that the detailed PDF from the experts in the room is just one part of that. And how do we create great content like we have in all other sectors of parts of our lives that help people do things with that detail, but particularly then in terms of events. So trying to find a rhythm where, so what we tried this year for the fixed wing side, for example, is acknowledging cost is a big barrier and all of these things, is to have at the end of the summer, so we just had 2 weeks ago, a kind of post-summer season reflection. You know, what did we learn? What went wrong? What are the problems? What does that mean for the kind of short-term plans for the next 12 months? Based on the biggest, we've got a bigger strategic picture as well from our different committees and advisory bodies. Then what we also then did much earlier in the year is had virtual events for different sectors, but acknowledging that if you're a busy pilot or a small organization, you probably more than an hour, 90 minutes is the most you can spend for anything. So let's have a virtual event. If our experts say, I need at least 3 hours to explain this. No, you've got 90 minutes, an hour with 30 minutes for questions, go. And we've started to do more than this. We've done, I think, over 200 webinars in different topics now covering GA, rotorcraft. We did some great partnerships with EHA, with Heli Offshore. We did some on a great one on safety leadership. So yeah, trying to do more of these. We're making lots of mistakes. I'll apologize if anybody has been frustrated by sound quality or things like that. But the more we do, the more we learn and the better we get.
And I just want to add that working with John, it's also internally focused too. We've got a safety day, GA safety day that's going to take place at an airfield right outside of Cologne, so that John's colleagues, and we have a lot of our champions that are in EASA are starting to retire that understand general aviation and rotorcraft and everything else. And what we're trying to do is give them a day where they can understand exactly, to Christian's point, you know, what do we do when we go and pick up somebody and take them to a hospital and rotorcraft in that golden hour, and what we contribute to society or in disaster relief and things like that. So we can go and let them see and touch the vehicles. And John's helping us. And I think we're going to have a really good turnout of your colleagues to be able to come up there and be able to see all the different aspects of general aviation.
And I think it's a really important, pleased you mentioned that actually, because I think Jim, you were saying, and one of you was, I think it was Jim, was saying, yeah, there's a challenge in the FAA where people, you know, a lot of experience has left. You've got lots of young people, you know, and we've come to that point. 2 people leading our GA roadmap have retired. You know, we've got people, yes, they've been near aircraft, but it's not there every day.
So it's great that Pete and the team at Gamma have got all of the key organizations together, and people who don't live and breathe this every day but are part of the GA roadmap team can go and do it. And actually, I was going to say, Christian, something maybe we can try and do from the Rotorcraft side with the Rotorcraft roadmap as a follow-on activity as well.
Thank you, Tom. Right, I'm going to ask one more question, but I'm going to ask you guys first. Any questions from any of you? No, I'm not doing a good job of getting questions out of you, so you're forcing me to ask more questions. Thank you. Let me put another question to you guys as independent organizations. We're trying to work together in collaboration. Are there any initiatives that we're working on together at the moment? Anybody want to answer that? Who wants to lead with that one?
Well, you know, in this area of advanced air mobility, you could be boiling the ocean on any one association. So I know we're working very closely with Jim. HAI are experts on heliports. So they're taking the mantle and running with some of the new discussions on our vertiports, whether it's in Europe or in the US, and Kristen's got to be a part of that. You know, Mike mentioned we're working on technology. We're trying to work with AUVSI to be able to go and try to make the UAS community function and understand that they can't segregate airspace. They've got to integrate. And how can we have sense and avoid so that we can have manned aircraft go through and transition up and down through that below 400 feet, or in Europe in the U space, and do it safely and have this handoff to traditional air traffic control. And we have to do this. We have to parse it out and work together as associations, because it's just so many things to do.
Couldn't agree more.
And I think from the EHA side, we do have a partnership agreement with HAI, and this is extremely fruitful. I mean, for our side, obviously we have weekly meetings. They are, of course, centered also around European voters, but there's a lot of other things that come out of that through this kind of regular communication, and we have exchanges on different levels. So, Jim and I, with the other heads of the associations, we have quarterly calls, which is great because, we're globally connected. And that's fantastic. That's really fantastic. We're trying to leverage safety programs that have been developed and proven here in the United States and roll that out in Europe. And I think this is really great. And we have, last but not least, the VOST right here. We're here, and we have these regular meetings on VOST topics where experts come together and say, what can we do together? That's why we're here.
Good example of it.
I think the other thing that we're certainly rolled up in is the SAF, the sustainability on the fuels right now, and getting the lead out of gas as well. So lots of work being done.
Yeah, we had a good session in Cologne on SAF back in the last year, which is really good. Look, guys, we've run out of time. I'm sure you're all really disappointed, right? But we have run out of time. I want to take the opportunity to thank our panel of leaders for coming up and talking to us today about what their priorities are for the next 12 or so months. It's an opportunity now for us to go to break for 15 minutes. Before we go, any final questions from the floor? Oh, we have one. Can we get up? John, can you run over with the mic? Thank you. I'm putting you to work now. ONO, if that's switch.
Just a quick comment. Pete, Gamma was really instrumental in helping us on USHST as we went through the safety enhancements project. And for the folks that have seen and a lot of references to the different enhancement initiatives over the last few days, you may not realize it was leadership coming out of Gamma from the JST and the processes, and bringing that to us and working on the USHST that was invaluable. So this idea of working together is not new. It's been going on a lot in the background as well. Just want to make sure USHST folks knew that. And thank you, Pete, for the support.
Don't forget to include HAI in that also.
Well, that just, yeah, I'm sorry. I put the two together because we were working out of the HAI offices on that, but it was the support from Gamma that really got us going on the process.
Thank you.
It's pretty cool. We all pick issues that, it is a formation, and who's in the lead. Like, we take this issue of the heliports in New York City. Jim is in the lead, HAI, but all of us, whether it's NBAA, anybody, we say, okay, we'll send letters, we'll energize the membership, tell us what you want to do. And on each of these subjects, the associations will pick a lead and we all drop in line. And I love seeing that. And we've got to do more of it, quite frankly, in Europe. We're a little more fractured with the associations in Europe than we are in the US, and we've got to get better at it because as Christian talked about, just our social impression, what they think, whether you're flying a business jet or a helicopter, I mean, we're the lowest of society as far as a lot of people think out there, and it's just this stupid mindset. But it's what will resonate with them. Is it economics? Is it all the jobs that we create out there, or how we are changing this? It's our community that's going to use sustainable aviation fuel before the airlines do, because we're not as price sensitive as the airlines do, but we've just got to figure out how we can influence people.
Thank you. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 15 minutes to come back at 2:35. But first, before we do that, I'm going to say thank you to Jim, thank you to Mike, thanks to Pete, and thanks to Christian. 2:35, I'll be out chasing you back in, don't worry. And for those online, 15 minutes, we'll be back. Hi. Okay, welcome back. Let's see how many we can get back in. We're coming up to the last couple of sessions of the conference, and I can see the crowd has thinned a little bit. So we'll work with what we have. As I say, we'll work the room. What we wanted to talk about is regional vertical flight challenges and successes, and that encompasses rotorcraft and eVTOL, as we've been talking probably in the last two sessions about. We were going to have Lorena Moraga coming from Chile, but unfortunately she was had to go and travel on urgent business. She was unable to attend us today. But we have Eric Perez and we have Christian Muller, who are going to join us now to talk about this. This is a conversation really on challenges and successes in their regions, basically. So it's in the region of the world. And what I can talk to is I can talk to the challenges and the successes that we have in Southeast Asia. And I think you're going to talk pretty much to Latin America and you're going to talk to Europe. I think we've heard a lot about the US so far, but this is an open conversation, two ways. So the whole idea is lessons learned. We learn from each other. So I'm going to start with a question, which is one that is quite close to my heart because I am an operator that operates in very remote regions, but probably less to Christian and more to Eric. What advice do you have for operators in an isolated region with no safety team at all? The guys are running out there, you know, they run autonomously. How do you get the support to them? How do you manage that in your part of the world? And that's for Eric, yeah. Is that on there?
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, thank you for the question. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. So it's not very easy to manage this kind of situation because we face a lot of topics with several countries. We don't have an even situation for every country. The authorities, the missions, for the operators, all the stuff that we have in the region is very high. So it's very complex also. The environment is also complex, so it's difficult.
So what advice do you have for operators, you know, that operate in those very remote regions? What advice would you have for them? How would you connect them to this level of information? Because really, we have a lot of people who have been in the business a long time, a lot of very intelligent people. They come up with great ideas and great solutions to fix problems or mitigate risk. How do we get that information to the front line, out to those remote regions? What advice do you have for operators?
Yes, one of the main advice from my point of view is to get this kind of meetings around the region, because sometimes there is only dedicated for fixed plane. So in some countries, we have only 1 or 2 events for helicopters, related for helicopters, and all is for the fixed wing. So this kind of meetings, of seminars are very, very important for the region. So I recommend or advise to keep joining forces and work together in that way.
And in a couple of minutes, we'll come to your slides and we'll let you run through your slides because you can tell that story more effectively. Christian.
Basically, I would tell them, look, we don't compete on safety. So get together and talk about the main issues you have in your operation in these remote areas, because typically these people know each other. They usually are competitors or they have a history some way or another. And I'd say, look, there's so much material out there, but you have to actually adapt it to your area, to your kind of operation, and make sure that if you learn something on safety, that you share that. You know, you can be competitors on the economic space, but eventually, if something goes wrong, everybody in the area will suffer. And so you're in this together. So there's an expression, but I'm not going to say it here.
Well, okay, so I put it in the context of I'm an accountable manager for an operation that operates single engine aircraft in the dead man's curve for 80% of the flying that we do, up to 16,000 feet with a bulletproof vest on and oxygen masks. Challenging work, and those guys are running autonomously. They're out in a very remote region in the jungle, up in the mountains. Now, how do I rest easy at night? How do I, as the accountable manager, know that they're doing the right thing, know that they have the right information, know that they have the right tools to do the job? I don't think I have many of the answers, but anybody out here operates helicopters in remote regions? No? Shoot, I'm the only one. Okay. Takes care of that question. So I've got a couple more questions, but first of all, what I'm going to do is Eric, I'm going to let you start and run through some of your slides. Have we got Eric's slides ready? We good? Eric, if you want to run through your slide deck, and then once you've done that, then Christian, do you have some slides you want to go through as well? So we'll let you go through those, and then we'll come back and we'll do some more Q&A. All right.
So I think it's coming. So first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. Next, I would like to say thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with you some topics about our region in Latin America. I am responsible for the aviation safety in Latin America for Airbus helicopters. I'm located in Mexico City, and I would like to share some information about what we are doing in the region. So I have had the opportunity to travel several times in several countries in the continent, in Latin American part, and that's allowed me to see how is working the safety management systems in some countries, not only for civilians, also but for military guys. And also we meet sometimes universities, aeronautical universities, and so on. So that allowed me to have a global vision about what we are doing in the region. So we will see these points, the Latin overview, the general overview of the region. What are the challenge, the success, and finally a conclusion, but it's not a conclusion, it's more a general reflection from my side. So next slide is, oh, no, thank you, no. Thank you. But something is wrong. No, it's not working.
Yeah, we haven't quite got the human factors on the clicker sorted out.
Human factors, yes.
Yeah. It's the opposite way around.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. No.
Sorry, and I put that down to poor briefing. I'll take the hit on that. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. Good example of human topics. Okay, as you can see in the screen, the region, the global region of Latin America is very vast. For example, meanwhile here is winter, in the opposite side in Argentina or Chile is summer, for example. We are talking about more than 11,000 kilometers from distance from the border of Mexico in San Diego, Tijuana, to Ushuaia in Argentina, to take one example. Sometimes it's more far to travel from in the Latin America region from comparing to Europe, for example. Another important topic is the language. The predominant language in Latin America is 90% Spanish. And you can imagine all the material that we have for safety, not always is translated. So that's one of the topics I will mention after. Also, you can see that we are talking about 4,400 helicopters, military and civilian, in the region. So the activity is pretty high. Sometimes it's concentrated in some countries or some cities. Now, continue with the overview. Latin America is unfortunately considered as one of the worst regions in the world regarding accidents for helicopters. Nevertheless, despite all the huge effort that we are trying to do in order to revert the situation, you know, two years ago, the COVID situation, the pandemic situation, put in the table another weeks that we have in the countries in LATAM. The affectation was not only for operators, was included the authorities. One example was the lack of training, recurrence of training for pilots and technicians, and also the maintenance of facilities in the hangars, the airports, etc., was affected, and that reduced the safety topics. It's more visible for the small countries in the region. As you can see, I take this information from several sources. You can see that the total accidents, more or less in the last year, 2021, was for helicopters, all kind of helicopters everywhere in the world, etc., was around 430. And the 30% of these accidents was in Latin America. So it's a huge number that we cannot allow to keep in the next years. So finally, this regarding the overview of Latin America, we have the same topics around the world. 80% of the accidents that we recorded in Latin America comes from human factors, operational topics. So we need to focus on that, and we are trying to do that because we saw some lack of training, lack of standardized procedures, unevenly SMS deployment in some countries. Even inside the same country, there is not the same level of SMS, for example. So what are the LATAM challenge that we have today? And generally speaking, after the overview, you can see the large number of helicopters that we are operating, and also the large territory that we are talking about, more or less 20 million square kilometers, sorry, in the region. So it's very huge territory to cover. And also as 90% of the population speak Spanish, but it's not the same culture at the end. So we have some difference, not only in speaking, but also in the regulations that we have this kind of topics. The missions, the environment is very complex because in some countries we have at the same time deserts, at the same time we have vast oceans, coasts, mountains, high mountains. It's very often to have operations in hot and high conditions. We have a mixed fleet of helicopters, new and old one. And also the infrastructure for helicopters are not very good in some countries. We have a lack of navigation aids for helicopters, and sometimes it's not permitted to fly IFR, but nevertheless, the conditions is necessary to have this kind of qualification for the pilots. Maybe the helicopters have the capability, but not the pilots. Also, the training that we have in the region not always cover all this kind of situation for the pilots and even for the technicians, and all this and other topics complicate a lot the improvement of safety. So I take a brief list of what we can fix in the future, and we share with this kind of comments or recommendations or thoughts of price, let me say, to several authorities, local authorities, but also we are trying to have the help from EASA, for example, and trying to put in the table this kind of opportunities that we have in the region. For example, the lack of safety promotion, as I mentioned before, only is for more of the seminars and conference are looking for fixed wing. So we need to put more emphasis in helicopters. The safety culture, I put systematic and systemic because sometimes we have all the processes inside the company, inside the companies of the operators and institutions, but off the job, there is another thing. So a real change of the culture is a key to go in the good way. I mean, we need to be congruent in this topic, the safety culture. We have also insufficient or not enough translated material, videos, posters, and so on. We have a weakness standardized aviation procedures for example, for the training of the pilots, for the training of the technicians. We have several schools, but they are not well aligned with the last regulations and so on. So we have also the weakness in airworthiness management, so that we need to put in front of the authorities in order to preserve the airworthiness of the helicopters and the rigor on the maintenance task. We don't have enough accident investigation data, so we know, okay, the one helicopter crashed, but we don't have enough data about what happened in the real cause or the root cause. Also, there is a political topics and so on. We have also lack of the support of aviation authority inspectors. That is crazy because the inspector that will qualify a technician or pilots, the inspector don't have the good instruction or the good knowledge about the helicopters that he's working with the pilot or the technician. So that's another topic. Also, the similar level of SMS implementation in some countries, even inside the same country, in the north or the east or in the central part, is not the same level of SMS deployment. So we need to strengthen this SMS deployment. And the last point is we are talking about 30 countries in the region, and we have only 10% of helicopter safety team located, one in Brazil, one in Chile, one in Mexico. So it's not possible to have only 3 dedicated teams in the region to cover all the stuff that we have managing in the region. So, but not let me say we are also doing good things. So not it's all is bad. For example, one way to improve the region was that we are recognizing that we increase the activity for safety topics with the support of the OEMs, from the support of EASA, for example, FAA, and other authorities, because today we are promoting, we are performing specific seminars for helicopters in some countries. And today, 3 weeks ago, I was in one country, and the people say, "Oh, it's the first time that we are talking about helicopters, safety on helicopters after I don't know how many years." The promotion also for the new local helicopter safety team, that's begun to bear fruits, because one example is Chile. 2 years ago, they was the third helicopter safety team in the region. And I like so much their last slogan, that is turning resignation into actions. I like it so much because some of the actions that they put in place is they are doing statistics. That is very good. They implemented seminars and workshops. They increased jointly actions with the local aviation authority. They perform communication campaigns and will promote SMS with no punitive action from the community. And also they want to make relevance on human factors topics. Also, there is another countries interested to grow in this way, or to go in this way for the helicopter safety teams in the region, like Dominican Republic, with also Colombia, Peru, Panama, and other countries also. The accident rate reported by some OEMs, has shown some decrease in some regions like Mexico, Brazil, and among others. Support from leading authorities such EASA and the FAA, with seminars, with the support of the knowledge, etc., help us for sure to go in the good way in the safety culture. And also we are starting to translate several materials in videos, posters, documentation, manual, etc., and that could for sure help more to the operators in the region, and also the authorities. The organizations like the BAST is very important, because we detected some years ago, when there was a International Helicopter Safety Foundation, the adherence to consult several documents in English, someone in Spanish, but that is a good improvement for the region. And finally, I would like to share my conclusion, but it's more a reflection. I show you some examples of what we are facing in the region, and the job is huge, it's very high. Nevertheless, we encourage us and encourage all the community to keep in this way, giving the support of this for these countries and for our authorities and the operators with the ways that I mentioned before, in order to have a strong organizations inside each country, and then cooperate in global way in the vertical aviation safety team. And it is important because the synergies that we perform here with this kind of meetings, we can spread in the other countries at the same way. So we need to coordinate better this kind of information and to cascade to the other countries. So let me end my presentation with this reflection that I really believe no new or additional laws or regulation will improve the current accident rate by itself. but a cooperative through a comprehensive safety culture could. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think I could emphasize that much more than anything else. I think that as an industry, it's near impossible for any independent organization to go and do all of this themselves. And hence the power of collaboration. As I said, for those of you who are here on day one at the introduction, I firsthand witnessed the power of collaboration across industry and how it can fundamentally shift and create economies of scale. Because if you all contribute your resources, your experience, your skills, you'll get a much better product at a lot lower cost point. So that's an important thing that we need to consider. We are going to take some slides with Christian, who's going to talk about challenges and successes in Europe. And then we'll come back for a bit of Q&A if we've got some time. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Now, what I'd like to talk about is the European helicopter industry. And I'll start with the successes first, because I think we talk about the good things first when we do a debriefing. So I switched it around, and then I'll talk about the challenges we have. This is a map of Europe, and you can see we have a lot of manufacturers. The green ones are conventional. The yellow ones are VTOLs or advanced air mobility manufacturers. So we have a very dynamic industry. We have a lot of innovation in Europe. But as you can also see, we have a lot of challenges. And thank you for the language issues, because that's what we have too. We have 26 languages on this continent that we have to deal with. And it's something that we often underestimate. So what have we been doing, and what are some of the successes that we have in Europe? I think it's clear that we have a very good safety ecosystem, and that goes to Franklin, John Franklin and his team at EASA. They have really been driving safety through ESPNR. They have taken up the responsibility and led in this way. So I think this is something that we really can work on. It's a collaborative spirit. It's something where people from the industry, Airbus, Leonardo, everybody comes together and works on solutions. We have products, not just Sonny Swift, but we have really videos that explain some of the issues that you're facing as a young pilot and how to get over them. I think this is really, really helpful. And so that's certainly a success story that I think we can really, really be proud of. And I hope that we continue with that. Now, the second thing is that with European Rotors, we have a platform where we can actually do additional training. We did not have an event where we were able to offer trainings, for management, for pilots, for maintenance people. And this is a new thing in Europe. And so for me, this is also something, because when you can do training, you can also work on safety. And I think safety and training goes hand in hand. So this is the second thing that I'm really, that I really like and that I'm really proud of, is that we have this forum, and it will grow over time. This year we'll be in Cologne, next month, and next year we'll be in Madrid, just to show that we are a European forum. So as HAI goes from one part of the country to the other, we're going to go from one country in Europe to another country. So those are the positive points, and I think we're really on the right track here. And I think we need to continue this, and with the collaborations that I've previously mentioned with HAI and VAST, we're on a good trajectory. So now to the challenges and the problems. Administrative burden is a huge, huge issue. And it's something that you think that, oh man, it's really difficult to get something done here. But actually, believe me, in Europe, it's sometimes even worse. It's actually gotten to the point where EASA itself has realized that this is an issue. So what have we done? Well, they have set up a working group, best intervention strategy, and they have come up with 160 points. 160 points of administrative burden that that actually make life harder for the everyday operator. And it's about compliance, and it's about documentation. It's about having the papers right. So what I say here is that actually overregulation is a safety risk. Point. What do I mean with that? An average operator in Europe, 3 ships, 5 pilots, some marshalers, they have to comply with 4,000 pages of European regulation. 4,000 pages. And you can see that here. So on the left-hand side, you have the operation part, which would be equivalent to your part 135, 2,200 pages. Training, part 61, 1,800 pages. And maintenance, COMO and part 145, 1,100 pages. So how do you think they're going to do that? How do you think this small company with these people who fly every day are going to do that? It's not possible. So this is a huge safety risk. Why? Because the boss knows that if the authorities come in the next day and do an audit, he's having a problem and he's not going to sleep well. But he wants his company to operate because he has these local connections to the people he works with, he grew up with, and actually he's the pilot now. He's the company who serves the communities around him. So that's what he does. So instead of going out and working with his pilots and making sure that they're doing the right thing, he's at home in the office, not sleeping well, and trying to get the papers right. So the authorities will not shut down his industry, his thing. So 80% of the European helicopter operators are about that size. So 80% of the helicopter operators are faced with that. Now, another issue that we have with this approach is compliance has taken over everything. So when there is an audit by the national authorities at the operator, they look, does he have all the papers? They just check, do you have paper A? I have seen audits where the inspector has asked for the credentials of the local chief of the fire department, whether he is allowed to do training on firefighting. Well, they have that. That's the crazy thing. They actually were able to show this. But you would not believe what the people said. You know, we actually prepare for an organization, for an audit like this, for about 3 to 4 weeks. So 3 to 4 weeks before we have the audit, we prepare everything that we could possibly ask for. And those are people working full-time on preparing for an audit to show paper. That has nothing to do with safety. But it's reality. Now, we can actually go one step further. Now, EASA does standardization audits, which means they actually go and audit the national authorities because EASA is the European authority that actually audits the national authorities. An inspector from the national authorities tell me they are scared of the EASA audits. So what do? Well, they push on the operators to get their documents right so they don't look bad and they don't have to do things. Now, if you get findings from EASA, usually what you have to do is you have to check every operator in your country whether he has done this thing that you got a finding on in company A. So the whole industry is actually punished for one finding in operator A. So it's this huge administrative thing that's going on. Now that's a challenge. 80% of the small operators have to deal with that. And frankly, you know, we need to get out of this. Because what's happening now are two things. The operator either gives up his licenses. There are a number of operators who give back their AOC because they say, I cannot do this. I'm not capable of doing this overhead. Or they go to other types of operation that are not regulated, like private operations. And instead of doing a flight under a commercial certificate, they now offer private flights that are not regulated. And we all know where that's going to go. So safety is not just having the best procedure in place, the best trained pilot, but safety is also the framework where we actually, within which we work. And safety has always a price tag. We know that. But when you look at these numbers right here, okay, so those are the typical hours in an official study that was being done. That's the number of hours that a small operator has to account per year to actually get the paperwork right. It's 4,000 hours. So that's 2 full-time equivalents. So again, how is the small operator supposed to do this? You get my meaning. So this is a risk factor. And when we talk about regulation, too little regulation is not good because we need to have a certain amount of structure. Francois, you mentioned that you don't have some regulations and you cannot get an approval. So that is an issue. But the other thing is also an issue. And especially in helicopter operations where we have typically VFR day operation with single engine helicopters that actually usually carry up to 4 to 5 people. We need to really think about what regulatory framework we need to maintain a certain level of safety in the operation. How can we fit this into the framework that we already have? How can we make sure that the owner of the small company is actually able to work on safety? Because believe me, they're his helicopters, they're his employees. He knows the wives and the kids of his employees. He's not going to risk his operation for anything stupid because it's his thing on the line. It's his company on the line. So we need to find a balance between what needs to be regulated and what needs to be left to the decision of the operator. And I think it's something that we really need to think about. How far do we want to go? And how much regulation do we really need? Thank you very much.
Christian, for that insight. I think there's a lot of challenges that we face. I think there's also a lot of positives and a lot of successes that we can take away from it. And dare I say, there's a similarity between, you know, both continents, right? So yes, a lot of countries speak Spanish, but as you said, culturally, they're completely different. And it's the same in Europe. As part of EHA, it's often a challenge to try and bring all these different cultures, philosophies, ideologies together. It's a constant challenge. And how do we achieve that? And I think EASA, has gone a long way to achieving that. I think EHA has gone a long way to achieving that. I think it was predominantly driven by ICAO, who said, look, we're not going to have 15 or 16 different countries all coming to us. It needs to come through one entity. And so that was kind of forced by ICAO. And I'm sure there's a lot of lessons to be learned from a European EASA in the context of Latin America. We've got literally 5 minutes left. So before I ask any questions, are there any questions on Zoom at all? Those make nothing, right? We've got a, John, sorry, man. Can you grab a microphone? There's a question at the back there. Yeah, I've got one here. On. There you go. That's workout for the day. There we go.
Thank you, John. It's good that you're getting workout. You seem to be the only reasonable person at EASA, so we need to keep you healthy.
Oh, we shall delete that off the recording, by the way.
Just anonymous.
The good thing is, we're about 7,000 to 8,000 miles from Cologne. So, John and I, we talked about this. So we know.
Yeah, no, I was just going to comment how extremely satisfying it is to hear those remarks about the risks of overregulation. I've been in the fixed wing industry for 2 decades, and I've observed how overregulation drives a lot of unintended negative things, and more awareness of the opportunity costs of new rules, new procedures, new processes is desperately needed at this point, because when you have too much stuff to do, you promote ritual overthinking, right? Oh, I've met all the rules, I must be safe. That is sadly very, very common, at least in the fixed wing industry these days. I've complied with everything. How could I possibly not be safe? And you end up with 737 MAX, fully compliant and disastrous. It promotes normalization of non-compliance. If there's too much to do, I obviously cannot run my business under these rules, then I'm not going to follow them. Except you don't know which rules those people are going to choose not to follow, and they may not choose well, because if you have 161 points to follow, I'm pretty sure there's 15 of them that you really, really should follow, and the others, maybe they're good, but not so essential. But if you create a culture where people are picking and choosing what they do because they obviously can't do everything, then you lose the ability to really focus on what is essential. And I think it's not just small operators. I saw this mentality at a major aerospace manufacturer, billions of dollars in revenue every year, super, famous brand. And yet the mentality there was, if we comply, we're okay. So I think all of that stems out of just having layered answer after answer after answer to many problems, all of them well-intended, but at the end of the day, which of those things are still useful today, because they never go away, right? We had certification, now we have certification and SMS, and all the rules that keep getting added all the time, all well-meaning. Do they actually work together? Are they efficient in terms of achieving our goals? And the answer is definitely not. So as an industry and as regulators, we need to start working on how to get the safety outcomes with less, paperwork, less repetition of effort, less just show me the data versus actually do something.
And I will add, and John can probably back me up on this, it's not a perfect science, all right? I know certainly I don't know from an FAA standpoint, but I know from an EASA standpoint, there is a push to try and be more pragmatic, certainly in rulemaking, trying to reduce the amount of rulemaking, because I know the tension it causes in the industry, so it doesn't enhance the industry. You could speak a little bit to that. I know there was a space. I remember some of the rulemaking tasks were just scrubbed off. Right, no more rulemaking. We're like, whoa, no, we need that rulemaking, right?
And that was, in fact, you'll remember that, the rulemaking cool down, as we called it.
I know, and I was on, I'm not innocent here. I admit, I was on one rulemaking task where we really wanted to do flight crew training and checking easier. And we were really positive about this. We really had good intentions. We really wanted to make this work. And what we came up with was actually 400 pages of new regulation. And in the end, we were like, oh, okay, no, that's really not what we wanted. But actually, it's gotten so complex that you have to reference to this article in collaboration with this article, with the exception of this, then you can actually apply this. So, we have this existing framework that we try to tweak ever more. And actually, there's unintended consequences just by using a specific word. In Europe now, actually, the safety manager from a CAMO, which is a continuing airworthiness management organization, often now is actually the safety manager for the upside. Why? Because the safety manager from the operation side does not have 5 years of experience in a CAMO or in a maintenance organization. And one word nominated is the word actually required the authorities not to accept a safety manager with 10 and 20 years of operational experience to do this job. It's unintended consequences. And that's the challenge,
And it's interesting, it's something we continue to debate. And I remember 8-9 years ago, we had our safety conferences on regulation in a performance-based environment. I have to say, at that point, I think even those of us at EASA organizing the conference didn't really know what we meant. But I think this is one of the big challenges. We say we want a performance-based environment, which means less specific rules. Boom. And then as soon as we do that, we've tried that and we have some of our webinars where when we say you could do this or you could do that, here's the intent of the rule, all we get is, why didn't EASA give us something specific to do? And it's like a flip-flop that goes from one side to the other. And I think just generally, I think the whole industry is we know what we want, which is less specific, more open rules. But actually, as a mindset, we need to be told what to do because it's easier to do that. And where's that fine line?
And that's the conundrum.
Which is kind of exactly what you said.
That's the conundrum we had when I was in Heli Offshore. We didn't want to create industry standards because we know we'd need to cater to the lowest common denominator. So you did that. What would you get? You get the lowest common denominator because everybody could say, well, that's what we should follow, right? And that's going to be the cheapest version, it's the minimum standard. So we created requirements, right? Protocols and requirements that people could follow and give the industry the ability to be creative and innovative on how they achieve the spirit of that requirement or regulation or standard, for a better word. Because the industry is quite good at coming up with that stuff. If you've got a small operation, they just don't have the budget to do that, right? And so, but there's some very clever people who can go, well, we can meet the spirit of that, and here's how we can do that. As long as the auditing matches that. I mean, I know that's a long way to go, and I know that's probably a secondary discussion. We have run out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a pin in it there. I want to thank certainly Eric and Christian for coming up, giving us their presentations on their successes and challenges in the region. And we're going to move straight into the last session of today, which you will be delighted to hear. But thank you very much to these guys. Eric, thank you. Thank you. Right, on to our next session. So for those of you who have hung in there, and for those of you online who are still hanging in there, we've got a really good session now with George Castillo, John Franklin, Tony Randall from the FAA. Sorry, Tony from Bell and George from the FAA. And you've all heard from John, so you know where he's come from. And we're going to talk about something that's slightly controversial. Interestingly, when I was working in the offshore world, we started working with some of the OEMs. Back then it was called Cassiopeia. Was that Gilles? Was it Cassiopeia? Thank you very much. Tony was there. So we worked with the OEMs on this project. And back then we called it the 5-star helicopter. This is not the context of that, but it is sort of the nemesis of that. And it's to really talk about how you can probably rate the equipment out there and whether that fits around certification or the type of operation that you're doing. At the moment, at that time, we're looking around the offshore industry. There was a lot of interest by everybody, and we had a lot of meetings around that. We ended up running out of steam for whatever reason it was, but this has been then adopted by EASA and it's been adopted by the FAA, who got together and started working on it. So I think there's going to be a good conversation to be had on this one. I'm hoping that you guys will engage in this one rather than just sit there and stare at us like you've done all afternoon. I'm hoping that you may ask some interesting questions about, well, how does that affect me? If I want to buy a new piece of equipment, can I buy an old aircraft with new technology bolted? Will that be good enough? Can I buy a brand new aircraft with new modern technology? Is that going to suit? Is it a customer requirement? Is it an operational requirement? I don't want to be too big, but I think the idea is really to speak to the gentleman here and kind of go through it. So this is a fireside chat. It's a way to raise some questions. We don't have presentations per se. It's just really a conversation. So I'm going to open with Tony Randall. Tony's been working on the subcommittee on this one from Bell, so he's not representing all the OEMs per se. It's his leadership role in the group. So he's going to come at it from his perspective. Yes, it may have an OEM slant to it, but I'm going to come to you first and probably get you to give your stance on it. Then I'm going to come to George about the FAA's position on this, and then I'll come back to John. All right, so Tony, if you want to open up with you're looking at me like
How we got here?
yeah, I think really let's have a conversation about how you've got here, certainly with the VART community and how it ended up being this point.
So I can tell you how I got to be the chairman.
You were voluntold.
Cautionary tale.
Yeah, voluntold. Yeah.
So what did we do? So you already mentioned part of Cassiopeia, right? So there was this effort going on previously with a couple of the OEMs and some of the IOGP, the oil and gas folks, to look at it because they use rating systems and some of the other things they buy for vehicles, right? So how would we do this for air vehicles, helicopters specifically? I will tell you how it petered out. The last meeting that we had was in Anaheim.
Yeah, exactly.
Heli
2020.
Expo. And what happened right after that? The world shut down. So, but about that time frame, and George can go into their timeline. I don't remember exactly. I do remember when it was, but or where it was, but I don't remember when. You had a couple other things going on in the world. EASA had their, I think it was the 2018 safety roadmap where you first mentioned it, right? So a potential for a rating type system for air vehicle for helicopters, and then the FAA, and George can cover this, came out around that same time frame, a little bit before, a little bit after, but it had been discussing it too, and kind of came out publicly with just a brief on. They would have some interest in it. So if you looked around and talked amongst the rotorcraft folks who are out there, they're like, well, you have two regulators would like to look into this, and you also have a large industry segment who's already kind of looking at it. So maybe we pick up and go from there. And so we had a discussion amongst some of the Cassiopeia folks to include some of the leadership out of that organization, and then across the realm to the OEMs. And we ended up where we are. I don't remember how many people we have in the organization, but there's multiple OEMs. There's a couple of industry groups to represent operators, as well as Gamma for that side of it. And then we've got regulators, both the EASA, FAA. We've got the industry groups, EHA, HAI. We've got OEMs and a couple of other industry folks, Aero Assurance, Gerald's they're helping us with identifying how we identify risk and then how we show it at the end. So what we've done now, and you can go to the VAST website if you want. There's a thing out there with our charter, basically says what we're looking at. But we have had 16 meetings once a month. We kind of put some guardrails around what we were looking at, and some guidance material, and we broke into two separate groups, subgroups, basically, one doing kind of a large aircraft mission and the other a smaller aircraft mission, just to see if this is even viable, right? So how would we do this if we did this? And so we've had, like I said, 16 meetings. Somewhere in there, we got these subgroups working, and we meet every month to go over what the subgroups are doing and maybe provide some guidance and some more, bumper lanes to make sure we're all going down the track. Doesn't mean you can't have a good idea that's not within what we're looking at, but we put a pin in that. We'll talk about it later, right? We need to just look at this concept, and it's kind of a proof of concept right now. And it's focused on the air vehicle and the air vehicle in its operating environment. So, for instance, you have a aircraft, a 407 offshore, and all he's ever going to do is fly from out into the Gulf of Mexico to one of those platforms and he's never going to see a wire. It may not be salvage, but in that operation, never going to see a wire. Why would he have wire spread? But take that same helicopter and the same company, could be the same company, same outfit, and they move it to Alaska and they're doing oil field replenishment and wires. Now you lose a pick, right? But you don't want to punish somebody for not having a piece of kit that doesn't know, it's not increasing the safety. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We've come up with a scheme of how what we think would work, and we are going to meet in Cologne at European Motors right after that. The vast majority of us, and we're going to run a platform or two in an operating environment through the process and see if it works. And then the intent is after that to outbrief the vast, make some tweaks, outbrief the vast leadership, and see where we want to go from there. We'll probably write a paper shortly after that on what we think about it, and then we can pick up and see what the next phase is. But that's where we're at. So we got here, that's where we're at.
So it's sort of a feasibility study at that point, really, for a better word. And I think it's just to set the context, everybody's familiar with the NCAP 5-star, right? Everybody's familiar with that? It's sort of
It's either NHTSA, National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, or there's another IIHS, which is the insurers, I think.
Yeah.
So there's two rating systems here for cars.
So when they take a car and they smash into the wall, right? We can't do that with helicopters. The concept is similar, but it's probably more around the advancement of technology and safety features. George, let's come to you. You sort of elevator pitch, from want for a better word, from the FAA's perspective on this.
Yes, hi, George Castillo. Maybe what I'll do is just kind of talk about the journey that got us to this event, to this presentation, and it's been a long journey. I've been privileged to have dedicated my time in the FAA, working strictly rotorcraft. Yes, I've done some fixed wing, but my responsibility has been rotorcraft for 25 plus years. So working regulations, policy, certification, also in the continuing operational safety area, where we oversee the continual workings, the products that we certify. So we're able to take corrective action in the form of new regulations, if that's what it takes, or policy, to rectify those root causes that are design related. We've worked with our counterparts in EASA to work collaboratively to solve solutions, share data. We've done a lot of outreach with industry, promoting safety. So rulemaking is, we're regulators, and I've seen the comments on regulations. I can't be accused of over-regulating because I haven't done any rulemaking in countless years. And that's the challenge that we have. Yes, we can do rulemaking. That's very focused, very targeted, deliberate, and it takes a long time. So we've always strived for voluntary compliance, safety promotion, because the rules are the minimum safety targets. You can always exceed those rules. So why don't we do that? What is missing out there that we're not equipping with safety features that are out there? So it's not that you don't care about safety, or the private owner who's flying their family doesn't care about safety. They do, but I contend that there's a lack of understanding of what it is that I am looking for from a safety standpoint. How does that feature, that system, contribute to the overall safety equation of that product? And so we've been searching for answers to that question. And we study the automotive industry, and if you look at the consumer for that mode of transportation, they're highly educated on safety, whether they're in the automotive business or not. So how can we capitalize on some of those concepts and try to apply into aviation? And this industry has an opportunity to take a very strong leadership role in that arena, because this hasn't been done in any aviation mode of transportation. With the urban air mobility vehicles that are coming out there, right now we're striving to identify that minimum safety target. But we know that there's a lot of innovations that are out there can be designed into these products. So if you take that extra step, how do you or how can you market that feature and inform the public the consumer that's going to be purchasing these aircraft. So they can expect demand, and that's good for safety and business. So we're looking at all those concepts and see how we can make it more practical for aviation. So from the aircraft standpoint, we put out a paper 2 years ago in a virtual conference of this concept. We don't have a solution, but we threw out a concept, and we challenged this industry to take that idea, morph it into something that you think is doable and practical. And I'm very happy to see that that's happening nowadays. So from an aircraft standpoint, we talked about certain safety features that are tangible. You can relate to them, but there's a lot of other safety features that you can't discern, you can touch, feel, and that's what we're getting to, or trying to get to here, is using the data that the USHST has already analyzed, identify risk exposures that are out there, identify safety enhancements. There's different degrees of enhancements that are available out there, and taking that information and equipping you with knowledge so you can correlate that to maybe your mission, your operation, and see what risks are more prevalent in your operation so you can make an informed decision on how to expend your dollars when you're trying to promote safety for your aircraft. So I see this more as a tool to make it simple for the consumer, which could be an operator, a pilot, or the general flying public, to have information by which they can make informed decisions from a safety standpoint.
Thank you. That's a good summary. And I'll come to John. John, when did EASA and FAA start collaborating on this, and what has it led to?
So yeah, so it's something that's been ongoing. The collaboration is something that's continuous. Certainly all the time I've been at the EASA, there's been, there has, since the organization started, there's been this collaboration and the relationships. And I know the personal relationship that you have with David Solar, particularly as your equivalent kind of head of rotorcraft in EASA, is, it's a great foundation between the two organizations that help move things like this forward. And similarly, the fact that at a personal level as well, we all, the community, it's a nice community and we all know each other, and that's helped to drive these things forward because it's, it's driven by passionate, enthusiastic individuals who really care about safety at heart. And I think that's been part of the journey of the story of this system and the scheme. From a technical perspective, I don't think there's anything else I can really add that hasn't already been said. I'm not the technical guy in the process, with very much, but reinforcing what George said, is that it's that, it's not mandating something that's going to help to do this. The time is too long. In many cases, it's the how do we use, whether it's safety promotion, whatever you want to call it, safety implementation and innovation, to help the industry make these informed choices that we were talking about. And it's interesting, probably a good point for chance to make. I have a kind of really good kind of practical story of something that happened to us not so long ago. We had a kind of GA kind of safety kind of day with a local flying club where a lot of the EASA pilots fly. And there was a guy we were talking to, and he pulled up in his really nice fancy BMW. And he didn't know it was an EASA day. He was just a member of the flying club, and he's talking to us all about this nice BMW he's got and this 4,800 euro a pack that he's bought on his 60,000 euro BMW that has all these safety features, and it's fantastic, and it does this and this does this. And then somebody said, "Oh, are you coming to join this EASA safety day?" And he literally, "Oh, you're the people from EASA," and then spent 20 minutes complaining about, why do I need icon perpetuity? It's something that costs, a fraction of what he just spent 20 minutes talking about for his car. Now, interestingly, the story of that is as much about context. Actually, later in the day, talking about this with him, he does a lot of traveling with his family and his young kids to the Alps in the winter skiing. And he bought that because, and that was important to him because he'd had an accident and one of his children had been, nearly really badly injured, and he wasn't going to do that again. He had that when it was all about the context that we were talking about. And that's the thing about the ski, is if you can help people make those informed choices, inform the industry. If you're, it comes back to what we were talking about in the SMS for small operators. If you're in an organization, you've got to make a choice right now. knowing what choices to make depending on what your operation is tough. There's a cost to something. I know the manufacturers, we've had these conversations many years, spend a lot of time and a lot of effort making safety technologies available, but it doesn't always get the traction we hope. And if we can help people make informed choices about what works in the scenarios that they have, so it's easier for a safety manager to justify that to the business, so they do it and they justify it to their customer. We were talking about reaching further down the customer supply chain kind of a bit earlier on as well, is all of that comes together in a scheme.
Yeah, I mean, there's that really good road safety advert several years ago in Australia about attaching messaging to people's values, right? I don't know if anybody saw that. I used to play regularly at conferences. They would stop a random guy on the street. It was planned. And so they stopped a random guy on the street, said, last year we had 292 deaths on the road here in New South Wales. What do you think is an acceptable number? And they just asked the guy randomly. He went, 70 people, 70 deaths, that's acceptable. Seems like a better number than 292. And he said, okay, bring out 70, he said into the microphone, and then of course behind him, they brought out 70 people. Right at the front were all his family. And in that second, attached to his values, and it's like, 0 is the correct answer. 0 is the correct answer. So it's attaching the messaging, which actually is a segue to another question that I have, which is, is this going to be voluntary based? Is it going to be forced upon the industry from a regulatory standpoint?
FAA standpoint, this is all about voluntary compliance. Within our organization, we have already looked at how to make our regulatory processes, requirements more efficient to promote, incentivize safety enhancing features, especially on the existing fleet. We issue the policy that Larry Liu, our executive director for aircraft certification, the safety continuum for Part 27. Prior to that, there was an unrequired safety enhancing policy statement for rotorcraft. Those were all examples of setting the internal procedures in place to accommodate voluntary compliance. Within our processes, we have the regulatory tool, which is mandatory, but we have voluntary compliance. We'd like to invert that bubble and make voluntary compliance the larger bubble and not rulemaking. As I mentioned, rulemaking is there. We'll continue to address it, but within the agency, we can accommodate about 40 rules per year, active rules per year. Right now, we have 50 plus. Some of these rules take years, maybe up to 10 years. Our backlog for rulemaking is over 100 rules, and every year that keeps increasing. Those are very focused. We will never achieve the potential for affecting a lot of the risk areas that we want to minimize, reduce, eliminate via rulemaking. So there's nothing mandatory about this concept. And that's why the industry is leading this effort through the VAS. FAA and EASA are contributing to that effort.
Yeah, and our view from the EASA point of view is exactly the same. It's not there to be a mandatory scheme that people are required to do. It's about how can we use these voluntary safety promotion, safety enhancement approaches through great collaboration and providing material and content that make things as easy as possible for people to do, so that it's easy to do the best we can together collaboratively than it is, George said, to put this into rules and make it complicated.
Do you guys see this as a good opportunity or stroke objective to increase the uptake of technology in the cockpits? You see this, as a form of, hey, this would be an opportunity because I don't think you can do everything, right? You can't boil the ocean with it, because you've got to keep it quite narrow.
And I think that's where being specific about the operation and what's needed for the different types of operation is so important, because there's certain things, wire strike equipment, protection things, they're not in cockpit things necessarily, but you know, there are certain circumstances where they're really useful and, but depends on the operation that you do.
Yeah, because to Tony's point, Tony's
Only
raising it,
20%
it's look, if you're flying the Gulf of Mexico, you don't need wildlife protection. But where do you start? I mean, are you going to kind of narrow that operational scope and just look at one area? Or are you going to do bigger
Start
areas?
simple. So we had, Cassiopeia actually had, one of the guys who helped set up the initial Euro NCAP come in and talk to us. And so we were not fortunate enough to be able to capture him for this current effort, but we did find somebody else within Euro NCAP who's currently working there. And he came in and talked to us significantly less in detail, but a couple of us in the room on this committee were part of Cassiopeia, so there's that memory there. But what we were trying to do is get the rest of the team, you know, to have the benefit of learning. But their basic principle is you can't boil the ocean, and you have to start simple. It has to be simple. It has to be clear to everybody who looks at it. It has to be concise. If you want the OEMs to continue playing, it has to be fair and a body, you know, somebody other than you guys regulating it or performing the function of looking at it each year or each other year, however long you do it. But it has to be simple. And so they said, you know, and kind of where we're at is start with 3 or 4 things. And that's where you start. And if you can build a scheme and a model that you can do that, and you can spend a year or 2 perfecting that, then you add to it, where you see things that can be added. So that's kind of what we're at.
And I was going to say, it's kind of interesting. So Cologne, where EASA's headquarters is the whole European headquarters of Ford, Toyota. And I have quite a lot of American friends that have come through the school my kids went to, who were part of leadership programs for Ford in the Focus program, the Fiesta and various other vehicles. And it's interesting, you know, anecdotally, not in any detail, but you know, their knowledge of how these kinds of schemes have completely revolutionized the car industry. And at the same time, it's kind of, there's something interesting happening in Europe right now where there's an arm of Renault, it's kind of the cheap vehicle arm of Renault called Dacia, that's Romanian based, very value focused, and are being kind of open about saying, well, you know, we're not going to have certain things on our cars, and we're going to accept that 3-star is okay in this context. You know, 3-star now, but what they're starting to highlight is that 3-star now is X compared to 10 years ago because the scheme's evolved. So they're saying our cars at our value price point are not competing against the new vehicles, they're competing against the 15-year-old or the 10-year-old X. And it's interesting to see how that kind of thing has evolved. Not necessarily that it's directly related, but you know, for those trying to kind of get their head around how this works.
Yeah. I mean, I'll
example.
put a question to the audience. So everybody looking at your tablets and your phones right now, I'm putting you on the spot. How many of you purchased a car for its safety features? Hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not because it's got a V8 and sounds cool, but how many? So I mean, there's only a few of you put your hands up. But if you were to drive an icy road and your kids to school every day, then how many of you would buy a car with safety features, right? It shifts your values. And I think basically we come back to the point you were trying to raise, George, about attaching it to people's values and it being voluntary, right? And being operationally specific at the outset. Let me ask you another question. But before I do that, any questions from the audience? Are we all still awake? We're all still with us?
I'll add one thing there.
Got a question there, Chris.
So just a little levity. So you asked a question about buying a vehicle for your family, you know, because of safety. So when I was getting a van for the family, I had to finally get the minivan. So my wife has very short feet, and I wanted safety features like the side impact bags and everything like that. But I really wanted the top of the line limited van, you know, the leather, all the tricked out features, because I just like that model better. But I used safety as the excuse. And I used the short legs of my wife as the excuse, because that's the only package that could accommodate all these other requirements. So that is an example of the values that you said, because I placed that value in there. But I think that is an entry point, you know, until you can make it be something people want to have because it's the right thing to do. You know, that's kind of the crawl, walk, run. I mean, a lot of people are clamoring for the let's make it regulation today, but we haven't even got it as a baseline voluntary or recommended system yet. So I think that you need to get that baseline, and let the market decide what the values are and get that rising tide. And then we'll see what happens with the market. And some people might be incentivized because these other people are making a good business case to the public. We haven't mentioned much here. We've been talking a lot about what we all know about the safety rating, but another objective of the system, the intent, just like it is for the automobiles, that this is awareness of the uninformed public. Now the idea is giving something that's easy for them to understand. The sticking point is when you get the other people in the room and they say, we don't want to make this become a competition to downgrade somebody who has an acceptably safe, authorized certified program. A level 1 or a level 0 is still the minimum standard. It's still considered safe. But is it okay for the operator that made the investment in that better systems to have the 5-star, 4-star rating? Is it okay for them to brag about that? It's just that I think that's one of the sticking points and one of the things that continues to get batted around in the groups that are working on this.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And also, I mean, we do want an international standard, right? We don't want EASA and FAA and Australian, and we want an international approach to this. It also then begs the question, well, who's going to be the arbitrator of that? Who is going to be the one who sets the score? Who's going to be the one that makes the score, right? Can't be the OEMs, can't be the FAA or EASA. So we're going to have to create that, just like NCAP or any of these other bodies. They're independently well-funded organizations. So another question, there's another question to throw out there, but really good. I love your story on the minivan. I've just taken delivery of a brand new Toyota in Indonesia, thinking, great, I'm going to have all the cool safety features. Wrong. And I got the top of the line spec. Couldn't get higher. It didn't have half the same features, the exact same Toyota here in America or in Europe. And culturally, that's acceptable to them. They're just like, well, that's what it is, right? So it's about driving those values through to the front line. I do have a couple other questions. Any more questions from the audience? No? All right, hang in there. We're nearly done. Let's have a look here. I do have another question. If my page would turn. No, it's gone to sleep. Much like a couple of you. Right. So in the operational context, I think we answered that question, looking at it in the operational context. I think that's the initial focus of this. There's another question, George, you asked me here. If the intent of the concept is to improve roadcraft safety, why not utilize the rulemaking process to issue new regulations?
On that one earlier when I described the challenges, and it's just not practical. We'll never be able to target all the risk areas that we need to target, and voluntary compliance is the most efficient and effective way to apply a broader solution to the broad spectrum of issues that are out there, because this industry is a very, the missions, the segments, it's so broad, so such a wide variety. So we can't come up with just one solution. That's why by identifying the focus areas and using this concept, all 6 may be appropriate and applicable to some operations. For others, it may be 1 or 2. So rulemaking is not the answer, and that is not our strategy to help promote safety for this industry.
And I thought this is going to be a really good discussion topic. Unfortunately, there's not a lot coming back, but hands up in the audience, who thinks something like a rating system is a good direction to go for the industry? Stick your hand up. I know there's a couple of the OEMs with hands up as well. Say that's the majority of you. I guess there's complexities in it, as we've talked about, right? In terms of who's going to be the arbitrator, how it all comes together. And I think the step by step, I think we look forward to when you get to that point and draft up some sort of feasibility study or report on it. I think that's where we ended up with Cassiopeia in 2020 when we were all in Anaheim, was to sort of say, the next step is we need to fund a proper feasibility study, and get this properly looked at. And then the feasibility study will draft out a paper which will go out And then we will start to identify who will arbitrate it, how we will get the funding for it, et cetera, how it will unravel. So I think this is a really positive start. All the effort you guys have put in. Massive thank you to you. I think there's general interest from the OEMs to do this. I know that some have newer helicopters than others, so that may be another driving factor. I don't know. Being a little contentious there. But
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. So we're on meeting 16 now, but you know, when we first started this and it got announced, you get phone calls. Why am I not in this? How come I'm not doing that? You know, you had to beat that down. And you're like, you can't have too many people in the room. We'll never get anything done.
Yeah,
I know everybody, and I know you have value added, but I also have, you know, these 3 people in here who also have the same knowledge base you do. And so what Clement, when we sat down and started looking at this, as the 2 chairs kind of started filling in what this would look like if we were to get the enough expertise from enough industry segments and enough regulatory bodies to adequately come up with a scheme that we think would work, right? A testing. And then, so you get those folks in the room, and we made sure we invited people we knew who would not be in favor. And so the room has industry professionals, like I said, from multiple OEMs, piston operator manufacturers, as well as, you know, as the larger manufacturers. It's got industry groups that do oil and gas. It's got industry, like it's got HAI, it's got DHA, so it's got regional and international and industry specific. And then it's got guys like Gerald in there with his group, and we pulled him in on purpose to help because we knew the tools he could provide, and he's also got a wealth of knowledge from the industry. So you've got this package of people, and then this package of people, you have people who it took the first 3 or 4 I had personal phone calls. I mean, from some interesting folks and
trying to explain it all.
And yeah, and so the whole thing was, I know you're against it. I know you don't like it. I mean, I got a call from my own lawyer who said, "What are you doing?" So anyway, we and I'm like, well, the company knows I'm doing this, so we talked about it. But we ran it, but the discussions on those first 3 or 4 meetings, they weren't really contentious. It was more like, okay, what are we doing? How do you bound it? Here's the risks, and we identified all of this, right? And that'll come out in the paper. Here are the identified risks, gaps. We'll probably talk a little bit about the automobile industry because that's the one most people are familiar with. And here's the differences, you know, and we know we can't go out and crash a new helicopter every year, just the cost prohibitive. And so there's certain things there we know about, but my main point is the group has been very professional in that there are folks in the room who are not in favor of this. We're not. So let's go back 16 months ago when we first started. Definitely not in favor of it. There's people who are in favor of it and people who are kind of like, might be interesting, or let's see what we can do. Or I'm just here to support because I think it might be good if we could work it out. And so to take that group of folk, and the agreement was from everybody, even the folks who didn't like it. Look, we invited you here because we knew you, one, you're an industry professional, you've got all this history, you've got all this wealth of knowledge of what goes on, and you're a valued member of the team. We know you're against it. That's one of the reasons you're here for 2 reasons. One is because of what I just said. 2 is because we know that you might not be for this, and it would be skeptical for you. But if you volunteer to participate and be active participants through this, at the end, and we keep really good minutes, we will hit all sides of the target, and we will make sure that the downfalls, the pitfalls, and anything else that we might have identified. And I got to admit, everybody that's played on the team has done a fantastic job. Even the folks that came out against it at first have been value added. So
I remember those first early meetings with CASIP here. I remember some people in the OEM community would say, never going to happen, never going to happen. Yet they were at the next meeting, and they were at the next meeting after that. I know that you probably, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I mean, I know that you're, co-chairing this group. But from an OEM perspective, surely you go back and you have those conversations internally in your organization. And are you meeting much resistance in your organization, or is there generally at this point now an acceptance that this is a really good direction to go?
I think where we're at right now with certain portions of leadership is they are happy to participate, but let's see what the white paper says. And then somebody will probably make a decision on somebody else.
And-
But they're giving it its due diligence, or its due, right?
Yeah.
Go participate, see where you go.
Hey, Francois,
And Chris, so
I know,
come to you to ask.
Jerry, I know you got some good information to add here, and then I'm going to say one thing while I come over to you. So I think a lot of the people in the room here care very deeply about this, and certainly Tony, thank you for jumping on that grenade. I can't believe that guy cajoled you into leading that work group. But something I just wanted to say is, for those of you who we're having a lot of meetings. There's been a lot of talk. Some people in here probably have, well, show us something. Show us something tangible, sink our teeth into. There have been lots of drafts, lots of proposals, lots of concepts that have been developed, written. Alexander Maj from Airbus has spent countless hours putting together a monster concept that includes multiple categories, subcategories, dealing with using a bow tie model to talk about, dealing with both sides of the risk equation, both the probability, likelihood, and the severity. And so Jerry's going to talk a little bit about that, but just want to give you guys the assurance that we are working hard. A lot of people are putting a lot of time, putting pen on paper to get these concepts developed. They're just pre-decisional, and putting them up here in front of everybody would probably just cause a lot of confusion, a little bit more angst than we were prepared to, to encounter. So just trust us that we are working hard, and a lot of people care deeply, and they're going to continue that work.
Thanks, Chris, for highlighting that point, because I think it's important for everybody to understand that there is a huge amount of work already gone into it. The reason it's not publicized at the moment is it will be at a later stage. But like Chris has highlighted, we don't want to cause confusion and set the hairs running in different directions.
Definitely work in process. So that's, it's kind of like the analogy about you don't want to see how sausage is made. We're still grinding the meat. So a couple of points I wanted to make. People are probably familiar with the concept of the 5-star safety rating on automobiles, right? And we used to call it the crash ratings. So if you think about that, the idea of, what you see on the videos of the crash of the car hitting the wall, and then they come out with a rating scale later on, that's where we really diverge considerably from what has been done in the auto industry. But at the same time, we're struggling with we're working our way through a few concepts that the auto industry is also trying to deal with now as well. And for any of you that have ever worked with bow tie in a risk management area, you have prevention and you have recovery, left side, right side. And in the recovery side here, we're calling it crash worthiness. All right. So that's where we don't want to be. A lot of what we're focused on is how do you prevent that adverse event from happening? Okay. And the auto industry is struggling with that a little bit right now as well, and their rating systems, trying to figure out how do they take credit for things like lane change warnings and pedestrian crossing auto braking systems. Those aren't in those ratings today. Everything's based on how well the car holds up when it hits the wall. Well, we want to avoid the wall. And they're trying to figure that out in the automotive world, and we're looking at it. And we have many different profiles. So we're looking at, what's different between, low altitude operations that are, significant to EMS, law enforcement, perhaps wildlife, other areas that are entirely different than offshore, that are entirely different than the personal private point A to point B. So there's a lot of different variables that are being evaluated here to decide what is available or soon to be available in the marketplace that can be included by the OEM. But the other difference that we have from the world of automotive, and I don't know what the average age of a vehicle is when it comes off of the street. I know I keep mine longer than most people do, but 6-7 years. We're talking about a fleet that goes back 40 to 50 years. So we also have to take into account the retrofit capabilities as well. And we basically are seeing that there's some baseline levels that we're going to have to say this is where the rating system would start. And maybe a 50-year-old aircraft won't make the cut. Maybe a 35-year-old will. We're looking at regulatory basis differences, and we're building from there to decide what is the kit, whether it comes new from the OEM or whether it can achieve a same level of enhancement to safety under a retrofit for an existing aircraft. Those are all elements that are going into this. So 16 meetings seems like an awful long time. There's a lot more to come yet.
That's a huge amount of work that's gone into that, to be honest with you. Chris, did you want to, anybody else ask questions? Yeah, one more question then. And you got one behind you as well, Chris, I think Christians.
I guess I just want to say that it is okay to be a competition. That we don't have to protect everybody. That innovation drive or competition drives innovation. And, you know, that when I first heard of this concept, I thought this is going to really be the most transformative thing that this industry's had in 50 years to drive safety. And unfortunately, if it's not you know, if it's a voluntary compliance, we've seen that nothing really will be innovative. Nothing will change. People will just strive to make that minimum. So I thought this is the opportunity to really push that bar, to make a competition, have people strive for that highest rating. And I think we'll get there, but there's going to be some winners and losers along the way, and that's okay.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for that. That's very, very important statement.
Thank you. Just a question. How is the political side influencing the way you define these ratings, and how would political influence then define also what kind of requirements would have to be met overall?
Maybe we'll take a stab at that question. From a political standpoint, Kristen, what do you mean? Can you emphasize, can you explain that a bit more?
Well, basically, you know, if you develop a 5-star rating or something like that, then obviously this is something you roll out. It's also a communication device where people will understand what 5 stars mean, what 2 stars means. And then, you know, obviously, you know, we will, once it's out in the open, it will be part of a political discussion as well. What are we expecting for operators to do? And how, you know, that's in the future. Is there any influence on the political side now in the working group to get certain things done, to shape it into a certain way?
My opinion is, and I'll come back to you guys in a second, my opinion is it will absolutely drive that. Why will it drive that? I talked about in Toyota I've just got, right? When you look at IOGP, and they were doing a safety drive because they had so many deaths on the road. So the second biggest killer, and I don't know how many of you know this, but the second biggest killer in oil and gas industry are helicopters. Hard to think about, but that's true. Now, I think the third on the list was RTAs, road traffic accidents. And they had a big drive to look at the cars that were driving and the safety features on that car. And that drove a lot of, they had conversations with the OEMs, and the OEMs said, we want your business. And they said, well, look, if we buy all Toyota fleet or all whatever fleet, Mitsubishi fleet, and you incorporate those at the same price point, then we'll offer those vehicles at a discounted rate to our employees, and they'll buy them for their families because they can drive their families around them. And that way it was a win-win, right? So it drove competition, it drove policy, and it drove politics. But I have no doubt in my mind that if this grows arms and legs, that's what's going to happen. I could be wrong, but guys, let's put a pin in it there, unless anybody wants to ask anything else. I think this is a fascinating topic, and one of which I'm going to keep my eyes on, and hopefully at our next BAST conference we'll have more feedback on how the work, and maybe we'll be in a position to share a bit more information at that point. Tony, what do you think?
You'll get more before that. I think, like I said before, if things go hopefully like we're hoping when we meet in Cologne and do the drive-through, and then modifications after that. We may have to do one more drive-through after we modify. It depends on what happens in Cologne. But once we show that this concept, once we're done with the concept that we've got in place, and put a pin in where we are, say proof of concept complete, then we'll go back and we'll write the report that I talked about with the warts and everything that's been identified, and maybe the shortfalls in what we've presented. You know, something here needs to be fixed. We didn't figure that piece out, but as it lays, it's a pretty good concept. And then the recommended next steps forward, you know, flesh this out more, find a body who's actually in charge of it, and then figure out how to flesh it out completely and then develop it So that paper is going to take a while, and at some point in there, we get a outbrief to the VAST steering committee and figure out how they want to handle it. Because ultimately we're up under the VAST, right? But at some point, and I'm not promising, but if we can get stuff done by Heli Expo, we might actually do a brief at Heli Expo.
We look forward to that.
So
Not going to hold you to it, but we
no,
will.
if we can get it done.
I fundamentally agree with the gentleman down here. I think this will be a step change for our industry if we can make it work. And the fact that there's a lot of effort going into it is really exciting to see. So
Yeah, there's been a lot of effort, and quite honestly, you know, you talked about retrofit. Probably where the biggest impact could be made at the onset, but it's going to drive off the production line stuff as well shortly thereafter. But you've got so many things out there that you could incorporate into older vehicle stress now that would be a step up in their safety profile and the risk exposure to just decrease all that. But I think in that area it can make a pretty quick impact. So you know, this whole thing is about trying to enhance the safety of the airline. That's really what it is.
which is good for our business. Full stop. Right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you guys to stay here because I'm going to do a quick wash up. But I want to take the opportunity to thank George, John, and Tony for taking the time to come up here and talk to us about this and share all the work they've done. Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to put my glasses on because I do want to cover everything, make sure I've got everybody here. But that's it, guys. That's the end of 3, I believe, very informative days. We are going to continue to strive to improve this, get the content right, get other elements of how we do it, how we manage it, how we get the information to you guys, how we get you here, how we share it, like we've got the online folks. So there's a few thank yous to make. I'd like to wrap up by saying thank you to all the speakers and moderators, to everybody who shared their presentations, who came up and shared their knowledge with the rest of the industry. That was one of the things that I think a lot of operators would like to come here to learn and listen to the leadership and other people who are actually experiencing the same thing, right? I used to be in one of these organizations, so I was at the leading edge. I was in all the meetings and all the conversations. Now I'm sitting in a little operation in the middle of, Indonesia. And I'm like, hey, man, I really need to stay connected with all of this. I really need to understand this. And so it's forums like this that really help that. So thank you to all the moderators for sharing that. I want to do a thank you to the VAST working group led by Gene and Tom. Guys, you've done an awesome job. A huge amount of effort has gone into planning all of this. So thank you very much for putting in all the time and the effort to get this show going. It was new, and we were extremely honored to have the eVTOL community join us. I think this is the first time that we've had it. So this is a massive bonus for us. I think this is really, really leading the way in the way we're going to go for the future. Certainly thank you to the FAA, USHST, and HAI for allowing this to happen, and the collaboration I think has been fantastic, Jim. So thanks for driving that. I know that's really a hot topic for yourself. Thank you to all the teams at the back, all the teams on the camera, all the teams who bought the coffee and tea, the host team. Round of applause to everybody, please, for doing that. Who looked after us. Thank you to the sponsors and exhibitors who gave me really good cookies at lunchtime. But thank you for all the food and coffee and drink that we've had. We've been well fed and watered over the last 3 days. This is a fantastic facility. So
I think I'd like to bring 2 other folks up there. Eugene Trainer, if you'd come up, and also Tom Glista. These are the 2 people that basically worked the hardest on bringing this together. You know, it's really good to have the FAA and the ASA here on stage with Tony. We really, the collaboration and the work that has been done for many, many months. So I want to get you 2 on board because I want to, since Tom's leading here, former FAA, and doing a great job for me, I want to give you the mic to thank people that you worked with that made this happen.
Boy, this is certainly a collaborative effort. I couldn't have done it without teamwork with the FAA, and of course, Emily and Tanya. Without them and the FAA comms team we work with, this whole thing would have just fallen right down the toilet. I couldn't have done it without them, and as I've told people out there, everything has told me that, oh, it's nice and smooth, but believe me, underneath, we're all like a duck running around, you know, paddling away to try and make it as well as we could make it. And I thank you very much. It's been a lot of work. Thanks. Here you go, Jim.
Well, I'd like to thank George, who helped with a lot of the technical planning, and Lee, who helped with a lot of the technical planning. And Helene Gandy, my chief of staff for Air 700, was a real great help. Mike Reiner, who helped guide us through the bureaucracy, guided, what we needed through the bureaucracy, was a real help. And so it really was, this was our first time where we joined with HAI and U.S. Helicopter Safety Team and BAST, and I thought it really worked out well. I wasn't sure when we first thought of the idea how it was going to work out, but I think it made a much better conference. So I'm glad we did it. And so I think I'm glad you're all here.
Thank you. Yeah, round of applause for you two guys. Thank you very much. And I'll let Francois finish closing it up.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you, guys.
For everybody.
Thanks, Jim, for bringing them up. Yeah, and obviously a final thank you to everybody who came. I know travel budgets are really tight. I know travel's really expensive at the moment. But thank you for joining us. Thank you for contributing. Thank you for staying here to the bitter end. Awesome. And thank you to everybody online who joined us. For those folks that could join us online, we appreciate it. Those who couldn't, it will be recorded. Remember, vast.aero is where you will find all the sessions recorded. So go and check it out there. What did we hear? On day one, I think the message was loud and clear about collaboration. We've heard that run throughout the 3 days, right? That we can't do this on our own. We heard from crash survivors, and we had some excellent speakers on day one. Day two was more sort of technical. We heard from the OEMs maintenance front, and obviously the eVTOL sessions as well on day two. And then day three, obviously we've had a full day of panel of experts and leaders talking about SMS. We talked about eVTOL, and we've talked about aircraft rating systems. So we've had really quite good conversations. I really hope there was some takeaway for you. Because, when we sit and plan these things, we always think, well, what's in it for me? Why would I spend my money to come here? If I've got 5 or 6 conferences I can go to in a year, why would I come here? Well, you come here because you have all the industry leaders and you have the experts in one room from across the world, right? So it's not like that. It's like that, for want of a better word. So there's a lot of learnings to be had here. And obviously, we're determined to improve this for next year and the year after that. We're absolutely determined to learn and make it better for everybody. So we are open to the feedback, and a survey will be sent to everybody. So please take the time to fill out the survey. We appreciate your candid opinions. I promise I won't hunt you down. That feedback has been valuable to really improve the product that you get. So please take the time to give us your feedback. Jim, I don't know if you wanted to say any final words, or you okay then?
Appreciate everybody. Don't want to keep them any longer than we have to. I appreciate the coming. And again, the goal is with the collaboration with the FAA to continue to get better. If there's something that you didn't get out of this conference, then we want to make sure we get it for you next time. We know that there's training and other things that as we try to do every year at Heli Expo and other events, we want to do events that industry needs to meet either your CAA's requirements or just your insurance company's requirements, anything that we can do to help make life easier for you and the hard work you do in the rotorcraft community. So thank you.
Thank you. And I look forward to seeing all of you in Atlanta early next year, if not before. Thank you very much for coming.